Listen to the sound. No, not that sound. Not that one either. There it is. Hear it? Lost in the background, quiet in the corner. That's the sound of words being wrung out of the moment. Proper nouns and action verbs, majestic adjectives, similes and simple declaratives, exclamations. Words are being built into sentences, and sentences are being grouped into paragraphs, and paragraphs are being piled onto one another like a child's teetering tower of ornate building blocks to construct stories. Listen.
Under the Superdome synthetic sky, 1,500 miles from home, the Patriots shocked the nation and delivered Greater Boston its first professional sports championship since 1986. Dan Shaughnessy, February 4th, 2002. Bobby Orr, hurtling over Noel Picard's stick, wound up in a corner, but the puck wound up in the net. Then pandemonium. The Boston Bruins had won the Stanley Cup for the first time since 1941. Harold Case, May 11, 1970. Philadelphians would rather Havlicek had stolen the Liberty Bell, Betsy Ross's bungalow, the main line, but he decided on the ball and the ball game. Bud Collins, April 16, 1965.
Since 1882, a string of men, and in the past 30 years, an increasing number of women from the Boston Globe have sat in the press boxes trying to make sense of the grand and not so grand athletic dramas that have been played out in front of them. While the rest of the crowd buzzed, roared, gasped, and ran onto the field in pandemonium, the sports writers of the Globe have taken a deep breath, maybe two, and run their fingers across a familiar set of keys. It's different being a sports writer in the Athens of America, the home of the bean and the cod, the never-ending talk show debates, and the fabled curse of the Bambino. There's an electricity that runs through every Boston athletic day, every event, a passion for fun and games, an edge that is unmatched anywhere else in the world. All of Boston, all of New England for that matter, sometimes seems as if it's one big all-age barroom when it comes to sports. Everyone debating whether or not Pedro should have stayed in the game, whether the Patriots should have punted on 4th down, or whether the Celtics drafted a dud or a stud. The games, the deeds and misdeeds mean something. Everything, even the smallest parts of that everything, is important. Think about it. Beefy football players make snow angels in the end zone, and the entire city, the entire region smiles. Everyone listens. Ground balls bounce through tired first basemen's legs, and the tears create a flood down Commonwealth Avenue. A wonder child from Parry Sound, Ontario flies through the air. An ancient raspy voice sputters out the exclamation that Havlicek stole the ball. A herd of runners turns the corner at Hereford Street and heads down Boylston toward home. Everyone watches. And the sports writer tries to make sense of it all. There are stories behind all of the familiar historic stories that everyone around here knows so well. That's the beauty of being a Boston sports writer. There are tales to tell after the tales have been told. Here are some of them. Slightly varnished by time, saved in memory, and not necessarily the words that appeared on the printed page. The happiest place to write about Boston sports, always, has been at the end of the many assorted athletic rainbows. The pot of gold is much bigger than expected. The colors are staggering. Who doesn't like to share good news? The Boston Celtics alone have brought 16 world titles home. Check out the banners over on Causeway Street. Each had an accompanying headline, "We win," or something like that. The Bruins have brought home 5 Stanley Cups. The Patriots, okay, maybe they were a little slow in the beginning stages of their history, have delivered 2 Super Bowls in the last 3 seasons. The Red Sox? Well, 1918 was a very good year, until 2004. Rocky Marciano, Boston Billy Rogers, Joan Benoit Samuelson, Francis Ouimet, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Who doesn't like to share good news? There have been chances in Boston to use the big adjectives, the breathless prose, all typing done with that song about champions in the background at the highest decibel levels. These have been the grand moments.
The Celtics just, they were always the clutch team, and I remember the basket Frank Ramsey made, the ball rolled around a little to win the first championship against the St. Louis Hawks. And it went on from there. Red Auerbach was a fabulous leader. I don't think there's ever been a better coach in any sport than Red Auerbach.
The Celtics at one time were a production line of success. They once had an entire decade almost to themselves, winning every world title except one in the 60s.
Bill Russell is the most important Celtic of all time. But Bob Cousy is the second most important, because if he weren't around, there wouldn't have been a team for Bill Russell to take to the championship.
Cousy comes in and he's a wonderful team player and absolutely turns things around, creates interest in the team, and they go on from there.
But of course, when Russell and Casey Jones came along, well, the complexion of the team and the success of the team began to change rapidly. And I think Russell, when you look at all the championships, is probably the greatest athlete that Boston has had in any of the team sports.
All you need to know about Bill Russell, if you don't know anything about Bill Russell, let me give you a number, 21. He played in 21 winner somebody's going home games tonight, and his record was 21-0. Either an NCAA game in which you only have one loss and you're out, or an Olympic game, or a 7th game in the NBA. Now, there's nobody in American sport, in any team sport, that can make a statement like that.
From the beginnings with Bob Cousy and Bill Russell, through the Dave Cowens years, through the celebrated glory days of Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert the Chief Parrish, the Celts were Boston's championship ambassadors in curious black sneakers.
I remember after they won in Houston, going to their party, and you get there late, and I remember Rick Roby had fallen asleep or passed out or whatever, and his mouth was open, and Larry Bird was taking cheese balls and trying to put the cheese balls into his open mouth, throwing them from maybe, I don't know, 15 feet away. I suppose if he got a real swish, Rick Roby might have choked to death.
The very next day, we're flying home on the plane, and Larry's sound asleep in his seat on the plane, and the trophy is in the seat beside him. So I sneak in, don't wake him up, make the picture of him sound asleep with the trophy beside him, and of course we used that the next day.
What made that time so interesting, that 80s, is that there was a perfect rivalry there. I mean, if they had just been a dominant team, it would have been good years, but not so much. But the fact that it was Lakers and Celtics, the fact that it was 2 of the classic franchises in the league, the fact that it was East Coast, West Coast, you know, all of those things, you know, played into it. And, you know, it was just great theater.
When they made the trade for Dennis Johnson, they hired Casey Jones. I always thought he was the perfect guy for that team. And Casey was basically, you know, roll the ball out there and go get him, guys.
It was the end of a close game, and they got into the huddle, and there was about 3 seconds left, and Bird got into the huddle and said, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. And Casey said, hey, Larry, I'm the coach, be quiet. And he said, okay, here's what we're gonna do. You go over here, you go over here, we're gonna get the ball to Larry, and everybody else get the hell out of the way.
We're down to 6. Bird in the corner, double fake, jumper, it's good! Larry Bird hits it with 2 seconds left.
And it was a really fun team, 83-84. I thought that final series with the Lakers was as good an event as I've ever covered. You had so many Hall of Famers, so many great players on both teams. I thought the Lakers had more talent, and the Celtics somehow won the series, which still amazes me.
But the 1986 Boston Celtics team, to me, is, and obviously I'm a little biased, is, I think, the greatest NBA team of all time, I really do. They had the best front line in the history of basketball, and Bill Walton was their backup center, for crying out loud.
The fact is that when he would come in, he and Bird would elevate the game to a new, not only artistic dimension, such as we have never seen before and will never see again, because there will be never a period, as if we live to be 1,000,000, where you'll get anything like a Bird and a Walton together on the same basketball team. I can guarantee you that. That is not going to happen.
Over the years, covering the team was one thing, but the writers also had to joust with Arnold Red Auerbach, a cantankerous little gnome with an ever-present cigar.
I would ask him a lot of tough questions. If he didn't like it, he'd blow smoke right in my face, literally. Take his cigar and blow it right. That was his indication to me that he didn't like the question I was asking.
And he used to say, "This is not a democracy. This is a dictatorship, and I am the dictator." I don't think you can get away with a speech like that with athletes today, but he did, and he won. Red used to throw agents out of his office. An agent would come in and say, "I'm here to arrange the contract for whoever it was," and Auerbach would say, "Out!"
You know, when Red got Tommy Heinsohn, he was a territorial pick. It's the same draft as Bill Russell and Casey Jones. It's the greatest draft in the history of any sport. He got 3 Hall of Famers out of 1 draft.
Well, Red Auerbach, as much as any individual in any American sport of the second half of the 20th century, and which would include George Halas. Red Auerbach came to Boston in 1950, and in the year 2004 is still high on the masthead as a valued executive of the Boston Celtics, and should be.
They marveled at the endurance of John Havlicek, and they treaded lightly with Russell.
I covered the playoffs in '69 with the Celtics. It was Bill Russell's last season, and the Celtics wound up winning the whole thing. And Will McDonough at the end of the game said, "Well, I heard a report that Russell's going to retire." He said, "Russell and I don't get along, but you go over and ask him. But wait till nobody else is around." So I waited and waited and waited, and everybody was gone except for Bill Russell was sitting there talking to Jim Brown. And I walked over, 26 years old, probably the whitest person in America, with these 2 black athletic cultural icons of the time, you know. And I said, "Bill, I've heard that you might retire after this." And I remember Jim Brown looked at me and he said, "Retire? The man has just become a world champion. Why would you ever ask that he'd retire?" And he thundered it out, and I went, "Oh, you know," and I kind of wandered away, you know. But it was quite a while, and of course he did retire.
They copied down the wisdom of a folk legend from French Lick, Indiana.
I think the average fan thought, you know, I'd love to sit down and have a beer with Larry, and maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, depending on what mood Larry was in, you know. But Larry always created the impression, dude, that yeah, you'd love to sit down and have a beer with him, and I think that's why people love him.
The Bruins, forever the working man's favorites, seen as honest laborers in the local meat locker, had captured hearts for sure in the past with Eddie Shore and the famous Kraut line of Milt Schmidt, Woody Dumart, and Bobby Bauer. But they reached their zenith in the 70s with the exploits of Robert Gordon Orr.
Before Orr came, it really was a borderline destitute operation. The Bruins in the mid-'60s were on a long succession of not qualifying for the playoffs, or if they did qualify, go out in the first round and really having no names. And here Orr arrives in the fall of '66 and becomes the immediate sensation of the town.
The advent of the Wonder Child from Parry Sound, Ontario, brought Stanley Cups in 1970 and 1972, and a local mania for all things black and gold.
There hasn't been any team with that kind of demand. They were the city's darlings. I mean, every kid in the street was wearing either Orr's jersey, Espo's jersey, and every kid was playing street hockey.
Some of the fans on the ice.
This was a hockey town in the winter, and there's never been anything quite like them in town.
With Espo and Turk, Haji and Pie, Cheesy and Number 4, nicknames and hijinks everywhere. Covering the Bruins sometimes seemed like covering the Marx Brothers at a night at a prolonged opera.
Only hours after Orr's shot slipped through the legendary Glenn Hall's thick horsehair goalie pads, tens of thousands of jubilant fans gathered at City Hall, just down the street from the rickety Boston Garden. Red-eyed and disheveled, the entire Bruins cast showed up on Mayor Kevin White's balcony to celebrate the win. In the midst of it all, the devilish Johnny Pie McKenzie tipped a bucket of beer over his honor's head. Cheers, Mr. Mayor. Kevin Paul DuPont.
They were the big bad Bruins. They were a roughhouse crowd, and they let people know they were in town. And Derek Sanderson was always a very good copy.
I think it was 72, they were playing the Rangers, and Derek Sanderson was going into the face-off circle. And I forget who the Ranger was, and he said to him, "If you touch that puck, you're dead. I'll run this stick right through your gut."
They just were rollicking, fun-loving guys.
I've seen a lot of locker rooms, but that first year at 69, that was really something.
As you can see, it's pandemonium here in the Bruins dressing room.
I had to beg them not to throw me in the shower with all my equipment hanging around my neck. I did. They stopped. They allowed me to take the equipment off, and in I went. But that's the way it was. I mean, they were just having a good old time, and they had a lot of fun. Believe me, those guys had a lot of fun.
Well, we got the cup, and that's all that matters. I'm so happy, Don. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to go crazy tonight, Tom. Right out of my mind.
Everybody called them the big bad Bruins. They weren't really that big or that bad. They were just good.
As hot and dynamic as it was, as it often does in sports, it changes on a dime. If they'd been able to keep that core team and had that team taken it a little more seriously and not been the great bunch of party lovers that they were, they probably could have won, easily 3, 4, maybe even 5 cups.
The Patriots were the late bloomers, orphans for the longest time, moving from stadium to stadium, punchlines to cruel jokes.
Pat Sullivan was the general manager at the time, and there were so many things happening off the field that I once joked with Pat Sullivan. I says, the only day I can take off covering your team, Pat, is Sundays, because nothing happens on Sundays with this team. Everything happens the rest of the week.
They only needed a new century to get moving. An implausible quarterback appeared from Michigan, and a beady-eyed mastermind took control of the blackboard.
That season had so many moments in it. I mean, it could have been, it was like a lifetime. When you go from the off-season, from the death of a quarterback's coach to the near death of their quarterbacks, and a guy who had been promoted to backup in a preseason, taking over, and look at the legend he's become.
And then to see Brady come in and just come in like a guy who had been playing for 10 years. I mean, that's the best way to describe him. He came in like a veteran player. And coaching-wise, on any given Sunday, they were just killing the opposing coach. I mean, Belichick and Weiss and Grinnell were coming up with stuff that just baffled the other team.
A businessman and fan took care of the finances. A first-rate stadium finally grew out of the ground in suburban Foxborough. And covering the Pats became the best beat on the block. Has there been any more fun than writing about the Pats in the 21st century?
This time, the ball didn't scoot between anyone's legs. It sailed between the uprights, straight and true. This time, there was no ill-timed penalty for too many men in the field, no black cloud, no bad calls, no Charlie Brown luck. Adam Vinatieri's last-second 48-yard field goal dropped over the crossbar last night and gave the New England Patriots a 20-17 victory over the St. Louis Rams in what may have been the greatest Super Bowl of them all. Dan Shaughnessy, February 4th, 2002.
It reminded me so much of the 1967 Red Sox, the impossible dream team, because they had a lot of young guys that you didn't expect to perform as well as they did, namely Brady.
All the players who were just no-name players or scrap heap players that came in and did what they did. I mean, Bledsoe coming in the Pittsburgh game and throwing a touchdown pass, and Troy Bryant a blocked field goal. I mean, it was just so many reasons that team should not have won a Super Bowl.
The Patriots' first Super Bowl victory right now is the greatest victory in the history of the city of Boston. It was completely unexpected. They were tremendous underdogs. They had this sad history of not only losing these kind of games, but having some terrible things happen. And this one was different. And they had all the drama you could ask. The Rams came back at the end, doom, 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 touchdown, touchdown. You say, holy cow, you know, here it comes. They can't quite hold them off. You know, but they did hold them off.
Brady stands in the pocket.
Brady got him where he needed to get him. He did what he had to do in that game. And this game showed just how much of a clutch quarterback he is.
In the pocket, steps up, fires down the field, caught. Troy Brown at the 40. He's to the left.
I'm sitting with Will, and as Brady was coming down the field, you know, Will was no quarterback at Northeastern, so, you know, he's calling plays, and I'm calling plays. When they don't go here with the ball, you know, we give him like full instructions, not that he needed it.
Looks, fires over the middle, caught by Jermaine Wiggins down to the 30-yard line of St. Louis, and Adam Vinatieri will try to win it with a 47.
Not until Vinatieri made that field goal did I actually believe this team had won the Super Bowl.
Set to go, snap ball down, kick up, kick is on the way, and it is good! It's good! It's good! And the Patriots are Super Bowl champions!
You got so used to the Patriots finding a way to blow it that I almost didn't believe it when I saw it with my own eyes. When I saw that ball go through, I remember saying, they won.
And Will and I jumped up, and for one little instant, we didn't work for the Globe anymore. We were two fans of New England sports all our lives, like everybody else, and we high-fived each other. And then we started looking at each other like, what did we just do? We sat there, started typing, hope nobody noticed.
And after that ended and mayhem was on the field, by the time I got out of there, we had 90 seconds to make first edition front page, so get going. So I stuck the disc on the computer call, and to this day, I wonder if I made the right choice. There were two frames that I had up on the screen. One of them was the one we used. The other one, Vinatieri's face wasn't as expressive, but he was totally off the ground. And also you could see a Ram player in the background, so it gave a little more of a historical perspective. Each picture had its own merits. But when you have 90 seconds to decide, you know, you just had to go with your gut instinct at the time.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why a couple of billion people around the globe are hooked on sport. Bob Ryan, February 2nd, 2004.
When the Patriots go back to the Super Bowl in 2003, it's a completely different mindset. For the first time in Patriot history, they're the favorites. They're playing the Cinderella team. It's the Panthers are the Cinderella team instead of the other way around. And so now the question is, well, how are they going to react?
Back in the eye, the hand off to Antoine Smith to the right. He is in! Touchdown, Antoine Smith!
I was sitting next to one of my colleagues, Michael Hawley, and the Patriots were up a couple of touchdowns. And I remember turning to Michael and saying, you wait, this is going to be one of the greatest games in NFL history.
And if you just could not be a fan of either team, you couldn't help but be entertained because your blood pressure wasn't 800 over 650, which is what it was if you were a fan of either one of those teams.
Out of a shotgun formation, Malone takes the snap, fires to the end zone, touchdown, Carolina!
None of us thought the Patriots would lose the game, only because they always found a way to pull it out, and that game was no exception. I mean, they found a way to pull it out.
Back to throw, looks, fires, caught, first down, Carolina 23-yard line, caught by Deion Branch.
But in the end, same thing, same pattern. They win at the end, field goal.
Snap, ball down, kick up, kick is on the way, kick is good, kick is good, Adam Vinatieri.
It was Groundhog Day, and as all these things started to happen that had happened before, I thought about the movie Groundhog Day, so that became the lead, Groundhog Day. And maybe not everybody got it, but it was Groundhog Day when the paper came out.
In both those Super Bowls, the Patriots were the better team, and there's no question in 2003 who was the Super Bowl champions.
And then there's the Red Sox. Another unbylined correspondent had the style right on Wednesday morning, October 14th, 1903, when he wrote, "Hats off to the world champions," as his lead when the Boston Americans won the first World Series 5-3 over the team from Pittsburgh.
By defeating the National League champions from Pittsburgh at the Huntington Avenue grounds yesterday, the Boston Americans made it 5 victories out of 8 games, which gave them a clear title for the highest honor ever achieved in baseball. Unknown, October 14th, 1903.
His immediate successors did equally as well. Sox win championship, the headline on the early evening editions of September 11th, 1918 shouted. a hurried description of the Boston baseball team's capture that afternoon of its 6th world title in 15 years.
The Red Sox won the first 5 World Series that they played, 1903, 12, 15, 16, and 18. And they were, if you did a survey, or you're not a survey, if you just wrote a story on 1919, said who's the American League's greatest team of the 20th century, the answer would be the Boston Red Sox. And they're looking down the road like they're going to keep it going, and no one ever dreamed naturally when they won in 1918 that would be it for that century.
It's just that after that, well, fantasy has been the championship story for the Red Sox writers since then.
If you're a member of Red Sox Nation, you know life is going to be blissful for a while, but always end in tragedy. Shakespeare would have loved the Red Sox.
The most meaningful, most celebrated Boston championship, oddly enough, didn't come from any of the local professional teams. The word Boston wasn't even written on the uniform shirts. You see, they were 4 kids from Boston, hockey players, just out of college, and they played for the United States of America. And this was the best sports miracle of them all. No one who was there forgot 1 minute of what happened.
The final image was Jim Craig and the flag. The picture wrapped up the entire crazy business. Who were these kids? They took a game that most of America wouldn't watch if it were being played in the cellar and made it a national mania. They were born on the 4th of July. They each lived on Main Street. They each drank milk and were rewarded with sugar cookies. Lee Montville, February 25th, 1980.
What was interesting about the 1980 Olympics was you have to go back in time to what the world was like then and what things were like in America. The economy was awful, you had huge inflation, the hostages were still in Iran, the Soviets had gone into Afghanistan. I mean, nothing was going right. So America was looking for a great story that made them feel good about America. And here comes this hockey team, a bunch of amateur kids, very young team, who no one knew, especially Mike Eruzione is a captain, he's from Winthrop. Jimmy Craig is a goalie, he's from northeastern Massachusetts, right? Jack O'Callahan, he was the kid who had gotten hurt by the Russians. There was a question whether he'd even play in the Olympic Games. Dave Silk, he was a guy that, was worried about making the team. And so suddenly there's all this pressure. This is not only a major international story, but a major local story.
I was the only Globe photographer there. Now we send 2 or 3 to the Olympics. The deal was I was supposed to cover something different every day, like cross-country skiing or downhill or the biathlon or something like that. The fact of the matter is I never left the center of town because that's where the skating rink and the speed skating rink were. I basically stayed right there just to cover, Eric Hayden and the USA hockey team.
And then they beat the Czechs, and that was the game. People said, hey, wait a minute, what's up with this? They're not supposed to beat the Czechs. And they beat them well. They beat them, I think, by 4 goals. And then it began to roll. And it was interesting to see it change because suddenly there were more crowds on Main Street. People who didn't care about the sport were caring about the sport. And now suddenly it's, who are these guys?
And we had nice relationships with all those Boston guys that they knew us and we knew them. And I remember there was a press conference once and Jim Craig was talking and the press conference was over. They were shooing all the reporters out and they came and they were going to get me. And he said, no, this isn't a report. This is my friend.
Herb Brooks, he threw me out of practice one day because all the BU guys would come over and hang out because I knew them all, naturally from covering their BU. They'd come over and shoot the breeze and what have you. And finally Brooks, he says, hey, Frank, you're out of here. And I go, that's fine, Brooksy, I've got all I need. Now if I went, But that was the thing. You either covered the games or their practices. You never let them out of your sight because they were such a huge story.
And you had no idea what was going on in the rest of the world. It was, you were focused in there and it seemed kind of important to you, but you had no idea that people were singing the Star Spangled Banner on airplanes. And I don't think anybody did there.
And even the players didn't understand that. So for us, our big thing was to try to put this into perspective as the perspective kept getting bigger. And I remember being in the press box for the Soviet game, wanting to make sure that I got all of it right. Hockey is a very crazy, fluid game. To try to figure out who scored the goal sometimes is a big problem. And I remember the pressure to try to get it exactly right. Who made the pass, who was on the ice. Those are big things later.
Jackie O'Callahan sitting on Mike Ramsey's chest. Jackie's got his arms up in the air and screaming bloody blue murder. I had no idea who it was when I shot it. I saw it and I shot it. That's what you do, you react. Then we get back to the dark room and develop it, and I look at it. It's Jackie, kid from Charlestown. This is perfect. You know, the rest is history.
That went beyond Boston. You know, that went beyond New England. That went beyond the U.S. I mean, that was a story for the world that was just incredible. Knocking off that juggernaut, you know? I mean, you know, obviously it was big. I mean, if you can make a movie about it 24 years later and have people saying how great the movie is, you know, it can only reflect reality, you know, somewhat.
Gold medal game was great, but the Russian game was what it was all about.
This was the best. This was the payoff for all the games that everyone watches. USA Boston. So the kids from Boston became famous. Who doesn't remember Jim Craig, wrapped in the flag looking for his father? This was the way it always should be. Celebrations at the end. Then, of course, there was the flip side.
There can be no words for this. Michael Madden, October 26, 1986.
And that's hit to dead center with Henderson going to run it down. And the Mets are down to their last out.
My job is to go to the locker room. So at the end of 8, off I go to the locker room. That's what I was told to do. Between innings, Bill Buckner had come into the locker room to use the facilities. And he comes out and he looks at us and he says, "You guys are missing a hell of a game."
That bouncing ball off the bat of Mookie Wilson of the New York Mets might be the most fascinating sports memory in all of New England. Bouncing, bouncing. There's Bill Buckner bending down. They were one strike away. Bouncing, bouncing, still bouncing. No moment has been harder for a Boston sports writer to handle. How do you describe a communal gasp, followed by a wail for the ages?
Game 6 in 1986, the World Series, what you have to do sometimes because of time constraints is you have to start writing a column before the game is over, because they start all these World Series games, it seems, at midnight. They do anything for TV. And you're missing editions by the moment. So you have to go down like maybe the 7th inning and start typing. And you kind of go on what you've seen so far.
Henderson has done it again.
My boss at the time, Vince Doria, said, "All right, you go down and do Bruce Hurst. He's going to be the MVP of the series. Go down to the locker room now and wait, so as soon as he gets off the field, you can grab him, because we want to get that into as many newspapers as we can."
And I was typing about this wonderful event that had happened. The Red Sox finally winning the World Series, and, you know, bluebirds flying around New Hampshire, and, you know, never going to snow again and all this other stuff. And what a wonderful thing it was.
So I went down into the bowels of Shea Stadium. They started wheeling in the carts of champagne. They had these huge boxes of T-shirts, and they were putting one on the back of everybody's chairs, Red Sox world champions.
There was Hurst in the clubhouse. He was getting ready he was going to get the MVP trophy and all the rest.
And Larry Cancro from the Red Sox was trying to get Gene Yawkey to come down to the clubhouse because they wanted her to get down before the rush of everything. But she knew better, didn't she? She knew that the game wasn't going to be over till it was over, and she didn't come down.
And we're listening to the game on a little transistor radio that Ray Fitzgerald had.
So, you know, time goes by. There's a lot of us out there waiting, and you hear noises and you hear roars, and you realize something's going on.
I didn't really notice the first couple of hits. I mean, it was, again, my head's still in the keyboard. And, you know, 1 hit, 2 hits. It's not till the 3rd hit, which now makes it 5-4, guys on 1st and 3rd. Well, gee, the tying run's on 3rd now, better pay attention.
But there's this black and white television in the bowels of Shea Stadium with a bad vertical hold. So the picture's kind of flipping around, and the voice is a little fuzzy. And so you're typing and you're looking up and, uh-oh, something happened. Wait a minute, and you just go back typing and, uh-oh, something else happened. And things kept going around and around, and the bad vertical hold,
Probably the funniest story was Kevin Mitchell was in the clubhouse having a beer and a hot dog and on the phone making plane reservations to fly home to San Diego the next morning. He was told to come down and pinch hit, which he did. He didn't have a cup on. He didn't have all his equipment on. He goes out, gets another base hit that prolongs that.
So the winning run is at second base with 2 out.
And we were standing right near one of the tunnels out to Shea. The two of us walked to the tunnel to look out, and that is when I saw the ball go through Buckner's legs at that moment. And I thought, well, my goodness, this is a different story now, isn't it?
Behind the bag, it gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
And then, of course, they all came in, and it was another one of those just very solemn locker rooms.
And I went from doing Bruce Hurst, the MVP of the 1986 world champion Boston Red Sox, to doing Bill Buckner, the GOAT of the 1986 World Series.
The column was like 2/3 done, and I just left it in my machine, and it stayed there for about 2 years. And then one day I just pushed delete, and it disappeared, just like the Red Sox chances.
That one night in Shea Stadium in 1986 was a spectacular test. Maybe the sports writer doesn't cover floods and wars and attacks of locusts, but does know about panic in the streets. The sad stories, the tearjerkers, always have been as compelling as the happy celebrations. And no other town in America has had a more compelling selection of them than Boston. Then again, no other town has had the Red Sox to follow.
As a newspaper person, I suppose, you have to love covering the Red Sox because everything goes wrong. And it's a bad news feast. And that's gone on through the management over the years.
They have been tearjerker central for almost 9 decades. Baseball in Boston has been covered the same way the Greeks covered tragedy, starting with the sale of Babe Ruth in 1919 and the celebrated Curse of the Bambino.
I've gone back to look at the microfilm of the Babe Ruth transaction. I wrote The Curse of the Bambino, and it was kind of important to find out what was going on back then.
And from 1912 to 1918, they're the dominant team. They win in 1912, 1915. Ruth comes in 1914. His first full year is 1915. They win. They beat the Phillies in 1915. They beat the Dodgers in 16. Ruth's now becoming a pitching star, and he's on his way to setting the baseball record for many, many years, consecutive scoreless innings in the World Series. But everybody knows that Babe Ruth was sold to the Yankees after the 1919 season, but it wasn't just Babe Ruth. There were a succession of players who were transferred to the Yankees by Harry Frazee, the owner, who was always in need of cash.
There was a lot going on. Fans upset. Ruth claimed he didn't want to go, all this sort of stuff. He was the Pied Piper. It was a big deal, and they had won. And he was the first guy to start hitting home runs, so it was not something that the young people were in favor of when it happened. And obviously it didn't really work out well for the fortunes of the franchise either.
The affairs of Red Sox Nation have been filled with train wrecks, shipwrecks, and yes, hanging curveballs. Go back to 1946. A single to center. 7th game of the World Series. 8th inning. Score tied. Enos Slaughter is running from first on the hit by Harry the Hat Walker, and Leon Culbertson is fielding the ball and throwing it to Johnny Pesky. And Slaughter, turning third, is still running. This was the start of a pattern. A playoff against the Cleveland Indians in 1948. A collapse in 1949 in New York. 7th games in 1967 and 1975. A playoff in 1978. Bucky Bleeping Dent. Who would ever worry about Bucky Bleeping Dent?
It was a beautiful autumn day, and the entire city was just complete buzz of this history, the Red Sox and Yankees. And I remember Yastrzemski hit the home run off Guidry in I think it was the 2nd inning. And Harrelson, between inning, came out of the broadcast booth, said to me, for him to hit a fastball on the inner half of the plate and pull it down that right field line at this juncture of the season, the man is Superman. The other thing that happened, of course, is the wind shifted during the bottom of the 6th inning, so it was then blowing out to left field when Bucky Dent came up, but that was a whole nother thing.
Hit high in the air to left field, going to the corner, Yastrzemski. It's over the wall, it's a home run.
in '78 having a lead and not being able to hold it, and then having it end in agony in the ninth, and then involving a lucky play of Lou Piniella, blinded by the sun, sticking his glove out and praying that the ball would at least tick off it and landing right in his glove and preventing the tying run from scoring.
It's on his shoulder.
We had come downstairs, so I was crouched in the aisle going down right by the Red Sox dugout, watching Goose Gossage pitch against Carl Yastrzemski. And I remember saying to Clark Booth, I've watched Yastrzemski now for all these years, and there is no doubt in my mind that he'll get a base hit.
And he pops it up.
Then Yaz popping out to end the game against Goose Gossage. Yaz made the last out in the '75 series, and Yaz made the last out in '78.
And the Yankees have won the division. The Yankees have won.
So we're leaving the ballpark, we're going down the street, and this friend of Montville's from New Haven, whose father owned a bar, looked at us and said, "The son of a bitch has killed my father, and now they're coming to get me."
Fast forward 25 years. Aaron Boone, 7th game of the playoffs, extra innings. Who would worry about Aaron Boone?
Fastball to get Soriano, 2 out.
The Yankees series, when Pedro didn't come out, I was stunned. There was no doubt in my mind he was not coming out for the 8th inning. It didn't even cross my mind that he wouldn't be coming out for the 8th inning.
Into center field. Damon will play it on a hop. Jeter will come to the plate. It's a 2-run game.
I'm watching the game. Pedro's in there, and I see Grady coming out. I thought at the time he was going to take him out, for reliever Timlin or Embry or whoever. And pats him on the shoulder and goes back to the dugout.
There's a pitcher that normally you wouldn't shoot that moment, but I shot that moment, a little walking away. Normally when a manager comes to talk to a pitcher, you don't shoot a frame of the guy walking away when he goes back to the dugout, but I think we had an idea that something historic was going on. Fortunately, it wasn't good.
A flare into center field. Out as Walker won't get it. Tie game.
And then Aaron Boone, who was a Yankee bust of enormous proportions, becoming the hero. It's ever thus, though, isn't it?
Tim Wakefield, had the Red Sox won Game 7, would have been a favorite to win the Most Valuable Player award in that series. And here you had a guy who was set up to be the toast of Boston, winds up taking them on in the fateful 11th inning in Yankee Stadium and throwing the pitch that caused time to stand still when Aaron Boone hits the home run.
And the game's over, and the traditional post-game press conference is about to take place. And Grady Little comes in. First question, why did you leave Pedro in? The second question was about, why did you leave Pedro in? And then there was silence for a good 10 or 12, 15 seconds.
I was writing at the time, and I kept kind of yelling, ask him this, ask him that, and nobody asked him a lot of tough questions.
No one had another question about any other aspect of the game. No one said a word for another 5, 10 seconds.
Nothing else for Grady after he walked all the way down here?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And I remember it hit me, I said, oh my God, they have all made up their minds nationally that this is the village idiot. They are going to kill this guy. He could right now I think he'll never manage another game for the Red Sox.
On the flight home, Wakefield's biggest fear was that he would be Bill Buckner. And he was deathly afraid of that. He thought that, that's all he would be remembered for. Would Red Sox fans have been quite so forgiving if they didn't have another scapegoat so close at hand? And that, of course, would be Grady Little.
The World Series logo was stenciled into the area behind home plate back at Fenway Park, and there was no need for the Sox to jump the gun and to allow photographers in there to take a picture of it so that it goes back to New York. They see this thing, and it was passed around Yankee Stadium. It did infuriate their people. I remember when the Sox had their post-mortem at Fenway, it was covered up like a dead body. There was a black tarp over that logo. Not a good idea.
The Red Sox have dominated the depths of despair. lost in their own room at that hotel down at the end of Lonely Street. Not that there haven't been other visitors to heartbreak. Even the Celtics have not been immune, even against the accursed Los Angeles Lakers. Remember Magic Johnson and a certain running hook shot? The Patriots, before they won Super Bowls, also lost a couple. The giddiness of the 1985 season soon found an antidote with the Chicago Bears in New Orleans. Chicago 46, New England 10.
When the Patriots went to play the Bears in the Super Bowl, the major domos at the Globe decided that we should have dueling columnists, that I should write a column that would run in the Chicago Tribune, and the columnist out there, Bernie Lincecum, should write a column that should run in the Globe. So I wrote this column, and I just killed Chicago. I ripped it. I said, you know, it's just the worst place in the country. The deep dish pizza tastes like cement. The people all wear bowling shirts. Yada yada. City of losers, and the Patriots will kill them. And then of course the Patriots went and stunk up the joint and lost about 510-3. So 3 or 4 months go by, and one day I get my mail out of the mailbox, and there's a package, and it's from Chicago. And I open it up, and it's a Ziploc bag, and there's 2 pieces of whole wheat bread. And in the middle of the 2 pieces of whole wheat bread is a folded up copy of my column. This is two months afterwards. And the guy had written a note. He said, thought you might need a little snack.
The classic moment that everybody remembers is late in the game. The Bears are down in the goal line. And instead of handing off to Walter Payton, their great running back, to give him his Super Bowl touchdown, they have Refrigerator Perry, the fridge, William Perry, the huge defensive lineman, is in the backfield, had become like an icon. And they hand him off the ball, and he slams in a touchdown. And there couldn't be a more humiliating moment than you're not only getting beaten by a ton of points, you just got run over by a defensive tackle masquerading as a fullback. And Larry McGrew was the linebacker who got knocked backwards about 10 yards. And there's a funny story there. He's laying on the ground, and Tipper walks over to him, looks down, and goes, hey, man, you all right? And McGrew looks up, and he goes, I'm going to be on every highlight film for the rest of my life. And it's true. The only clip you ever see about that Super Bowl is Refrigerator Perry running over Larry McGrew for a touchdown.
With the Big Tuna leading the way, the Patriots returned to the Big Easy in 1997.
The Patriots get back to the Super Bowl with Bill Parcells, and they're going back to New Orleans, the scene of the crime.
You can't underestimate the arrival of Parcells. He brought instant credibility to a franchise that had 0 credibility.
They're going to play this great Green Bay Packer team that's supposed to be a dynasty with Brett Favre quarterback, and all these Dorsey Levens, and they just got tons of talent, Reggie White, and how can you beat the great Packers?
But this ride would end abruptly with one Desmond Howard and that Big Tuna getting away.
The thing about that game was thinking you're right back in it, and then boom, Desmond Howard. One kick, and the great imponderable of that game, always will be. If Troy Brown had been playing, then Howard would theoretically have not been able to return the kickoff.
Unfortunately, Parcells had also already decided he was leaving at the end of this, because he and the new owner, Bob Kraft, were just at odds pretty regularly.
Will McDonough, one of the greatest reporters ever, had the story that Bill Parcells was going to resign no matter what happened in the Super Bowl. And he had this story, and he decided that it should go in the paper the Monday before the Super Bowl.
He called in from the airport and said, listen, here's the deal. Parcells is gone as coach. It's definite. He's gone as coach. I know it. I got to get on a plane right now. And he said, I'll call you when I land, but that's the story. So I turned to one of my assistants, Robin Romano.
So what Robin has in front of her is really just a series of facts that Will has strung together on a phone at an airport. So she sat down and she composed the story, an entire story with all the background.
And then Will landed, and Robin gets him on the phone and read the story to him. And Will said, you know what? That's the best story I've ever written. Thanks very much.
And that was a bomb. The idea that this would be his last game, he was going to leave at the end of the week when the Super Bowl was over. Fans were outraged, thinking that, number one, he was leaving, and number two, his eyes was not on the prize this week, and he was not going to be trying to win the Super Bowl as much as he should. It ruined their week. Of course, they ended up losing the game. Willie was blamed, the Globe was blamed. I remember walking through the streets of New Orleans and getting more abuse even than usual because I was a member of the Globe staff, and there was this perception that we had ruined the whole Super Bowl for everybody. And there was a man dressed as a clown, I think it was a man, coming one way in the French Quarter, and I was with people, we were going to dinner. And as I walked by, as I passed, the clown said, "Shaughnessy, you And I was thinking, what's a quick retort for that? You're a clown, you know? What else could I say? But it was, that was the climate of New Orleans that week because of Willie's story.
The Bruins faltered time and again, even in 1971, in the midst of their Bobby Orr glories. Marvin Hagler still awaits a recount of that decision against Sugar Ray Leonard. Things happened. That ball hit by Mookie Wilson on that October night in New York still keeps bouncing. The workplaces for the writers have been some of the most famous addresses in Boston. Courtside at the Boston Garden, sometimes a busy and active place in the closing moments of a Celtics game, was always a thrill.
And that wonderful building, I don't know why I say wonderful. It wasn't a wonderful building, but it has wonderful memories, packed with wonderful memories.
I was one of those young bucks that thought this place is a dump. It would be nice to have air conditioning. I'd rather not see rats every time I leave the building, this kind of thing. But as the time grew nearer for the garden to go down, I started to feel differently because of all those great memories.
I used to write columns about King Rat. The rats infested the garden, and the management, of course, denied it.
In the old garden, when it got that hot, not only did play get sluggish, but even the linoleum in the corridors began to sweat. So even if you were just like leaving the stands to go down to get a hot dog or wherever you had to go, that became somewhat perilous just to walk through the place.
There was a real home court advantage for the Bruins and the Celtics. There's no doubt about that. The ice was different in quality and the area, and of course the old parquet floor at the Garden, which you had to know the dead spots.
The Garden would shake on a nightly basis just because of the way it was constructed and the fans and the enthusiasm.
I loved it. I loved the people who worked there. I loved reading the stories about it.
How do you say goodbye to a friend? Get the whole gang together for one last hurrah.
The old Garden's last hurrah was loaded with lasts and hurrahs. There was the last trek up the filthy ramps, the last bombastic anthem by René Rancourt, and the last sniffs of the stale hallways that always smelled like the bottom of your popcorn bag. Finally, before the place went dark, there was the final opportunity to see the greatest player who ever wore skates. Bobby Orr was the last person to skate on the sacred surface, stepping off the ice at 10:58, long after most of the fans had left the building. Dan Shaughnessy, September 27th, 1995.
Norman Levier, who had a cerebral hemorrhage in his second year, came back for the last skate at the Garden, an exhibition game with Canadiens, and couldn't make his way around. He's still paralyzed on one side of his body. So it was really a touching scene to see. Bork was the main player who helped him around, but as I remember, like John McKenzie and a number of others helped bring him around. A lot of people had tears in their eyes that night. It was a very touching scene.
I loved the Garden, and I hated the thought of it closing or being demolished, and I tried to stay away from it when all that was going on.
When they took the wrecking ball to the Garden, and I came home, I remember, from the airport, driving up over Route 93, and there was this gaping hole in the building, and you can actually see the yellow seats, and it was like someone had taken a wrecking ball to my house. I spent more time in that building than I did in my own apartment the first 4 or 5 years that I worked at the Globe.
The Fleet Center has, maybe in 30 years it'll have some character, but I doubt it. The Garden had character.
Stories have been typed at the top of that lyric little bandbox on Yawkey Way for over 90 years.
We in Boston tend to think that we've been especially blessed and cursed. Especially blessed in the sense of some of the great signature moments of all time. The Fisk home run in the '75 World Series, the Dave Henderson home run in the playoffs against the Angels, Pedro Martinez coming out in the '99 All-Star game and doing what he did.
After an emotion-draining prelude that left the greatest players past and present awash in tears around Hall of Famer Ted Williams, it was difficult to imagine that anyone playing in the 70th All-Star Game could make this stage his own. But as one fan in the sellout crowd of 38-187 in Fenway Park shouted from the grandstand last night, "This is your house, Pedro," and Red Sox ace Pedro Martinez once again staked his claim on Yawkey Way's most precious property. Gordon Eads, July 14th, 1999.
It was a wondrous show, which was trumped, improbable as that sounds, by what took place during the introductions for the actual game.
The All-Star Game was one of the great pure events, and the best part of it, of course, took place before the game when Ted Williams came out on the cart.
You had the All-Century team out there. You had the All-Star teams of 1999, American and National League. It was and is the greatest assemblage of baseball talent ever gathered in one place.
And there's Ted, 80-plus-year-old Ted, waving to the crowd and coming to the center of that field.
Being surrounded by players of the day and what felt like a sincere and true reverence for Teddy Ball Game and his place not only in the history of the Red Sox but in the history of the game.
And then the most pathetic public address announcement in the history of American sport.
It's requested, please, that the all-century players head for Canvas Alley so that you can take your seats for the game.
I mean, it was like, what's wrong with that? That means you, Frank Robinson. Yeah.
Major League Baseball was on a schedule for national TV. They had to, these things are supposed to, let's wrap and get on to the game. But that wasn't going to happen until those players got to demonstrate their affection and love for Ted.
What a wonderful, spontaneous moment that was. It was tremendous. And then Pedro, who was his year, his great transcendent year, starting the game and striking out 5 guys and getting himself the MVP. It was a wonderful night.
You got him. Strike him out, throw him out, double play.
What was it called? Schaefer Stadium? Or was it Sullivan Stadium? Or Foxborough Stadium? Whatever it was, it had its own low-rent charm before the emergence of a modern Taj Mahal named after a capital investment group. Wait a minute, a razor blade company. Maybe the most glorious stadium in Boston isn't even a stadium at all. Or maybe it's a stadium only one day a year. Patriots Day, a celebration of sport in the hub, when a succession of streets starting in Hopkinton and ending next to the Boston Public Library become the 26.2-mile course for the Boston Marathon. Recent years have shown that a good knowledge of the geography and cultural peculiarities of Kenya is not a bad thing to have to cover the marathon. But it hasn't always been that way. Not at all. There have been local heroes, local characters, wonderful moments.
101 long-distance runners compete in the 50th annual marathon race of over 26 miles at Boston in the United States.
When I came to Boston, there was very little interest. People made fun of it. I wrote a column saying 26 miles, 26 reasons not to watch the marathon.
But what happened is also Jerry Nason, who was the Globe sports editor and a big track buff and a big marathon buff, he's the guy that basically put the Boston Marathon on the map. He would be writing for weeks up to it, talking about all the local favorites. I remember it would always be stories about Johnny Kelly. And would he win it? Did he have a chance? And he did win it twice, but he finished second 7 times. It was a great personal thing. Everybody was rooting for Johnny Kelly because he was a local guy.
The great thing about the marathon always seemed to me was you go out to Hopkinton and it was like electric. You know, there was such a great sense of hope and promise, and I'm going to break my record, do my best. And then you would go to the other end, people come stumbling in, and you know, you'd go into this clinic where podiatrists would be just walking down slashing blisters.
But when the marathon really exploded was in the 70s here. When the running boom began, Frank Shorter won the Olympic marathon in Munich, and suddenly everybody was running. And a lot of the people were in Boston. Billy Rogers, the Greater Boston Track Club. So suddenly you had this huge sport that was taking off, and it was taking off in Boston. And where were they doing it? The Boston Marathon. Even then, when Bill Rogers won, no one knew who he was. He was a BC graduate student. And he showed up on the starting line with a t-shirt. He had stenciled in GBTC. And I remember he won the race, and I remember he was stopping at the top of Heartbreak Hill to take water. But Bill knew what he was doing.
He is quite simply the best. From Sherburne, Massachusetts, and the Greater Boston Track Club, the king of the road, this is Bill Rogers.
So here comes Joan Benoit, who is from Maine, not a big state for marathoners, hasn't got the classic marathon body. She's not long, lanky, skinny, but yet she was an amazing runner. And she had set a world record in the Boston Marathon. Just insane. I mean, like, you know, way faster than anybody ever gone before. And she was being told by male runners that she was passing, hey, slow down, lady, you're going way too fast, you're not gonna finish.
It became an internationally famous event, and I just refer to it as the marathon because there are others, but it's the one that really counts.
Other wonderful moments have come at the country club in Brookline. Every generation or so, the general population has been allowed to trample across this hallowed stretch of well-mowed golfing tradition. Starting with the triumph of young Francis Ouimet, local boy.
There were clubs that have hosted more U.S. Opens than the country club, but to take 3 U.S. Opens on the same venue, and they all hold their special place in history. You know, 1913 may still be the most significant U.S. Open ever played. Until Francis Ouimet triumphed in 1913, golf was pretty much a game that was just relegated. The only people who played it were the rich. And here was just the all-American story of a kid who walks across the street, takes on the best players in the world at the time, Harry Vardon, Ted Ray, and not only holds his own, but beats them. 1963 was significant in that Arnold Palmer, he just couldn't win it again. And that was a golden chance for him to win it. And he didn't win it. Julius Burroughs just cruised to another U.S. Open victory. And in 1988, it cemented Curtis Strange as one of the premier American players of his era and in the history of the game. The fact that they each went to playoffs, I think, is remarkable, and it speaks wonders for how that course is, over the course of time, has been, you know, one of our best golf courses in the country.
3 U.S. Opens and 3 playoffs. Remarkable. How could you possibly top that?
As United States Ryder Cup captain Ben Crenshaw wept, Justin Leonard made an impossible 45-foot putt to send his teammates into the biggest Boston joyride since Paul Revere approached Lexington and Concord. Joe Concannon, September 27, 1999.
Since the 1918 U.S. Open, all the way to the last day heroics of the 1999 Ryder Cup, every once in a while, Boston has become the capital of golf.
The 99 Ryder Cup was unique because it had really picked up steam.
The Ryder Cup really had begun its rise to its apex, and we wanted to make sure we covered it perfectly as well as we could.
And all of a sudden you look around and you realize how big a deal this was, because maybe 35 or 40,000 people jammed into the country club every day.
We were prepared for the United States to lose. They were really in a position where they could not win. And as we were monitoring it from the office, you know, first they win one match, then they win the second match, then they win the third match, and we're saying, is this possible? Could this really happen?
And I remember looking, my boss said, you know, can the U.S. come back from this? And I said, actually, you know, it looks like they're going to fall just short because Justin Leonard's getting crushed in his match.
Don decided that the best pair for me to go out with was the Justin Leonard pair. And what had happened with the Globe, interestingly enough, is we had ordered team jackets. And these team jackets were, oddly enough, the same colors as the Marshall's jackets. They were the same color red, same company. And I didn't have, because there were limited official on-course credentials that you could have. You know, so I didn't have the official credentials that would allow me technically inside the rope to follow this particular group. But I figured out, I said, listen, I'll just put my jacket on and pretend like I'm in some official capacity here.
And all of a sudden, the roars started coming. Justin Leonard made another birdie. Justin Leonard made another birdie. Olafabo bogeyed.
It became clearer and clearer that this was going to be a crucial group, you know, a group that could determine the outcome of the Ryder Cup. I was getting more and more people giving me sort of a sideways glance, like, what's she doing here? And then they're looking at my jacket. I said, well, she must be somewhat official. She's got the jacket.
You never know if you're covering it just right, and if you've got just the right amount of people at the moment that this is going to transpire. And I knew we were going to knock it out of the park because everybody was in place. All we needed was for the event to cooperate, and of course, Leonard kind of helped along those lines.
So I was there for the whole bit. I was, you know, probably about 20 feet away when Leonard made the putt.
This looks good. Oh, my!
And it was utter chaos. And the only way to get off the green, I remember I just got down on my hands and knees and crawled backwards down the fairway and then come all the way around. I would be surprised if the Ryder Cup ever reaches a passionate point that it reached in '99 again.
One thing all of these sports addresses have had in common: the Garden with the Country Club, Fenway with Gillette, Beacon Street with BC, is that wonderful, strange things have happened there. Sometimes expected, sometimes not expected, but wonderful.
Great athletes produce great moments, and Boston's fans have had their full share of them.
The late sports writer Will McDonough always said, "I can write faster than anyone who can write better, and I can write better than anyone who can write faster." Half boast, half jest, this was a one-sentence explanation of the writer's perpetual dilemma in his beat-the-clock existence. No tests have been trickier than the last-minute changes of fortune that have sent residents of Dorchester and Billerica, Chelmsford and Chelsea onto the streets in wide-eyed wonder or flat-out shock. The fantastic finishes that grab and excite everyone the most. Those have been the toughest moments of all. Fantastic finishes? Take a November afternoon in 1969. Harvard Stadium. Two unbeaten teams. The mighty Pete Varney and Brian Dowling, the Harvards and the Yales. Dusk gathering. A result ready to be entered into the log. Lead paragraphs already written in the head. Yale is going to win, and...
If I do say so, I wrote a terrific column because I got a photographer's pass, and I was on the sidelines. In the first half, I was with Harvard. And John Yavs and the coach, first of all, they were heavy underdogs. And the first half was a great time to be there. They're all moaning and groaning. Oh, geez, we're dead.
The fake to Hill, the sprint to the right by Dowling. The look, and he's around the corner. Touchdown, Brian Dowling.
Second half, I think, well, I'll go over to Yale and see how they enjoy it. They didn't enjoy it for very long.
But we had given up. At least I had given up that I knew Harvard was going to lose because Yale had a good team.
Champy, back to throw. Looks for the corner. And it is to Bruce Freeman. Touchdown!
And finally, the Yale bench was chaotic. Onside kick. What's the onside? Oh, geez.
Yard line. Remember, the ball must travel 10 yards. Once it has traveled the 10 yards, it is anyone's ball. Onside kick. Who's going to get it? Scramble. Loose ball. Harvard. Harvard has it. Wow! What excitement. A hush. He looks. He's got time. He wants to throw. He's still back. Time has run out. He throws. Touchdown! Dick Gatto! Dick Gatto! It is 29-27. Hang on to your hats, boys and girls.
I guess it was that pass to Pete Viney that tied it. If I remember correctly, the tight end. And we saw him step into the end zone and turn his back and put his hands up. And the ball was in his hands for the two-point play that tied the game, right? And everybody went crazy.
He's got it! He's got it! Tabari! And it ends 29-29! What a finish!
So I think I got two halves of the column, one, and each was a tragic side, actually. The Harvard's going way behind, and then the Yale's being caught. So, yeah, I was there, but, you know, you can find 100,000 people who said they were there.
Harvard wins 29-29.
Then there's another football game in Miami in 1984, the day after Thanksgiving. The game is done. Nice try, Boston College. Nice try, Doug Flutie. The obituaries for the season already are being written for the local team and the local kid from Natick. But wait, there's one more meaningless play from the middle of the field. Flutie has the ball.
The two Boston College linemen discussed the bizarre, amazing thing that had happened on the floor of the Orange Bowl. They dealt with the metaphysics of the event. That wasn't Gerard Phelan who caught that ball, Big Mark McDonald said. God caught that ball. No, Big Jim Ostrowski said softly, God threw it. Lee Montville, November 24th, 1984.
I think that was the day after Thanksgiving. And I wasn't happy going there. You know, I mean, you had to leave on Thanksgiving, and you missed Thanksgiving at home, and you're down in Miami. It was raining. It was a rainy day, and, you know, why am I doing this? What's the whole deal? And then to just sit there and to see that unfold.
You see him throwing that pass, and it's a pass we've seen how many, you know, maybe more than any other image in New England. That pass has become, you know, one that just resonates over the years.
I was always a big Doug Flutie booster, and that was the capper. I mean, that was just a terrific thing.
I remember we ran it on the front page of the Globe. You know, we ran how the pass was, how it had happened, and that was a pretty big play for a sporting event at the Globe. I mean, the front page of the paper, sure. The top of the front page of the paper, not usually. And but that obviously rated it.
The standard for all Magic Boston moments came on the night of October 21st, 1975. Actually, 34 minutes after midnight and into the morning of October 22nd. How many times have you seen the video clip? No matter what the number, you haven't seen it enough. Carlton Fisk swings and the baseball heads toward the foul pole and left at Fenway Park. 6th game of the World Series. Fair or foul? 12th inning. The ballots already are being collected in the press box to determine which Cincinnati Red is the most valuable player. Fair or foul? Foul. No, there's Fisk leaning, willing the ball to move to the right. Fair.
Call it off. Call the 7th game off. Let the World Series stand that way. 3 games for the Cincinnati Reds and 3 for the Boston Red Sox. How can there be a topper for what went on last night and early this morning in a ball yard gone mad, madder, and maddest while watching, well, the most exciting game of baseball I have ever seen? Ray Fitzgerald, October 22nd, 1975.
Game 6, don't have to say anything about Game 6. Everybody agrees it was one of the great baseball games ever played.
And I wrote down on a piece of paper, Bernie Carbo. And like the next batter up was Bernie Carbo. He came out of the dugout and he was a pinch hitter, and Bernie Carbo hit the home run. And it's I've been trying to figure that out with stocks, you know, biotech.
Deep center field, way back, we're tied up.
As it went along, it just got more tense and more tense.
Dwight Evans' catch off Joe Morgan, which I'm not sure in some ways wasn't more difficult than Mays' catch because it was directly over his head and so forth. The great instinct of Rick Burleson, run across from shortstop to cover first because the throw was wide. Those moments were so great.
I almost missed the home run at Fisk hit because got a message, there was a phone call from the office, and not like it is today, no cell phones. There wasn't a phone where I was sitting in my auxiliary press box, and I took the call and I quickly ducked back in the main press box in time because he only hit like the second pitch of the bottom of the 12th.
There it goes, the long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
To see Fisk hit that ball, which we all thought was going to be foul, and have him, through the power of persuasion, I guess, with the gods, shove it back into fair territory.
I was thinking, as I do a lot of times, that I can't believe I'm so lucky as to be here being paid to watch this game. Then as soon as Fisk hit the home run, I had to think, how do I write 1,500 words in 22 minutes? But that was part of the fun.
I think for one swing of the bat, that has to be number one.
But in the end, I think everyone felt that the Red Sox won the World Series 3-4. And of course, Cincinnati had the World Series 4-3. It was just the way everybody felt.
And Fisk was our hero, perhaps not the hero of the 75 World Series.
Once upon a time, John Havlicek stole a certain ball, and the radio announcer, Johnny Most, almost strangled on the excitement.
If your wallet is missing, if your piggy bank has been lifted, or if somebody has stolen your gal, put a tail on John Havlicek. Call DE8-1212 and tell them you have the guy, the biggest thief this city has ever known. Bud Collins, April 16, 1963.
Havlicek was guarding Chet Walker, and a long story short, he deflects the ball away. He guessed that it was going to Walker, deflected the ball away, and went over to Sam Jones, and he dribbled out the clock.
I remember writing the column, I said, call 911. John Havlicek stole the game, stole the ball. He's the thief of all time. And he was. People went crazy.
He gets it out deep, and Havlicek steals it over to Sam Jones.
What made this special is the call, because Johnny Most famous call.
Havlicek stole the ball. It's all over. It's all over. Johnny Havlicek is being mobbed by the fans.
The next day, on WHDH, which was the preeminent sports station and the station in town in those days, Jess Kane replayed this thing endlessly and gave cachet to Johnny Most's call and made Havlicek famous forever.
Once upon a time, there was a triple overtime game. The Celtics and the Phoenix Suns. Game over, Celtics win. Wait a minute.
Game 5 turns out to be, in my opinion, the greatest NBA game I've ever covered. The Celtics attempted to deliver the ultimate knockout punch and got up by 22 points over the Suns. And you would have thought that in Boston, before a howling crowd, they would roll over, go home, and we'd get this thing over. Well, no, they came back, all the way back. Suddenly we're in overtime, and the one sequence that everyone remembers, of course, is the John Havlicek apparent game-winning basket. The clock was allowed to run out. The people went on the floor. Everyone thought the game was over. Well, it turns out that there should have been time restored on the clock. It took a good 10 minutes to clear the floor, get everyone back on the court, and give the Suns one more chance, one more play. Paul Westphal goes up to, you can see him presenting a situation to his coach, John McLeod. And what he was saying was this: we're down by 1. But we need to go the length of the court. He said, if we take a timeout, which we do not have, it'll be a technical foul, and then we can get the ball at midcourt. And McLeod bought the idea. It was Westfall who presented this idea to McLeod. JoJo White fortunately makes the technical free throw. Now the Celtics are up by 2. And we all know what happened then. The inbounds pass came to Garherd. The ball rattled home, and we were tied and into another overtime.
It's good! It's tied again! I don't believe it!
Eventually we get to a third overtime, and the final winning clinching free throws are made by Jim Ard, the backup center. So his final score was 128-126, 3 overtimes. And when you go consider the scope of it all, the way the Suns came back, the extraordinary events of the overtimes, it still remains the most exciting and fascinating and I would say best played game that I've ever covered.
Once upon a time, okay, only a couple of years ago, the Celtics put together the best fourth quarter comeback of all time.
I remember sitting courtside under the basket, and Pierce kept coming to the same spot. He kept driving baseline, left side baseline, some acrobatic layup. And watching him chip away at this lead, and in NBA, in basketball, momentum is just an unbelievable thing. When the Celtics can't miss, and the Nets can't make a basket, and it's just falling apart, no matter how many timeouts, and the crowd's going crazy.
It was chaotic. I remember Kenny Anderson, saying to everyone, as a matter of fact, normally I'm a pretty loquacious guy. And being an interesting statement from Kenny was, but I can't think of anything to say. I think mostly there was a lot of shock. Can you believe we just made NBA history? And I think, they owned the town at that point. And it was really a celebration more reminiscent of a team winning a championship than winning a single game in the Eastern Conference.
For the Patriots, Adam Vinatieri has been a one-man fantastic finish. Field goal kickers have a tendency to fulfill that role. Forget the Super Bowl kicks. Remember the last play ever at Schaefer Sullivan Foxborough Stadium? The night is January 19th, 2002. Seems to be a little cold out. Seems to be snowing too. 23 yards. If he makes it, the Pats beat the Oakland Raiders. Seems to be a little controversy too.
With Wonder Boy quarterback Tom Brady at the controls, the Patriots' magic bus rolled on a carpet of packed powder last night. It appears the football gods won't stop pushing this team until it arrives in New Orleans for Super Bowl 36. Dan Shaughnessy, January 20th, 2002.
Well, I'd left the Globe for a few years to go to Sports Illustrated, and then I'd taken some time off to hang out with my kids, and the Globe lured me back. And we had agreed on me coming back in January. And Don Squire, who was our sports editor, thought, why don't you come back for the playoff game? The Patriots were going to be in the playoffs. They were playing Oakland. It was a night game, a Saturday night game. And I thought, well, wow, what a way to come back.
The Patriots, of course, were the underdog. And the Patriots had really hoped before that game that they would get weather, that some weather would have either severe cold or snow or something. And the snow began before the game, so you figured Kraft would get the tarp on the field, but he was very smart. He pulled a red Auerbach, and that the field was never tarped until quite late, and by that time a lot of snow had accumulated underneath, and by the time the game began, the field was a mess, which Bob Kraft figured would help his team. Unfortunately, the Raiders are the ones who got out to the lead. They were playing very well in this stuff.
Visually, it's great to photograph snow and football. We like to photograph when the elements are bad. Mud, snow, rain, all that makes for great photos. But the snow was fluffy, was coming down, and it looked like a winter wonderland out there.
I remember being told, you need to file now, you've got to file now. Well, my story is going to be on page 1 of the Sunday paper. I don't know whether they're going to win or lose. I can't file now. So when Tom Brady gets sacked, it's over. The game is over. They have lost. And I'm working on that story.
Now, as I see Tom Brady go back to pass, and I have no doubt to this day, I don't care what the letter or the law says on that rule. He fumbled the football.
And I remember Bob Ryan going crazy in the press box, saying, that was a fumble. That was a fumble.
We watched the replay time and time again, and we said, that's a fumble, that's a fumble.
And all of a sudden, there's this flag, this review, this discussion, and this bogus reversal.
We took out our little rule books, at least I did, and when I read the rule and the way the officials called it, it was the right call.
It was just a horrible rule, and it was properly called, but it's a horrible rule.
at that moment, I said, that's it, I'm on board. These guys are going to win the Super Bowl. Because when that stuff starts to happen, you're blessed. There's stardust all over you.
But then, Adam Vinatieri kicks this amazing field goal.
Coming up, snap, ball down, kick up on the way, and it is good! It is good! 45 yards! Adam Vinatieri kicks it through the snow, and we're tied at 13 with 27 seconds left to play.
And then there we are, watching this football game. And there's Adam Vinatieri lining up for the kick at I don't know what time. Oh, you know, it was really, really, really late. And here he is in this swirling snow, and he kicks that field goal, which I think is still one of the greatest kicks ever in a snowstorm to win that game.
Snap, ball down, kick is up.
And I remember turning to Don and saying, you know what? This is why I came back. I wouldn't have wanted to be anyplace else on that earth except for with my Globe colleagues that night.
And it's a mob scene on the snowy field of Foxborough. Oh, baby!
In college, that one-man fantastic finish belonged to David Gordon of BC. November 20th, 1993, South Bend, Indiana. 41 yards. A chance to lay a 41-39 upset on number 1 Notre Dame. The snap. The kick.
Everyone who stood tippy-toed on BC's bench to catch a glimpse of David Gordon's game-winning 41-yard field goal was sent spiraling to atmospheric heights on the wings of an improbable 41-39 upset over Notre Dame that left the nation's polls quaking from a tremor of seismic proportions. Michael Vega, November 21st, 1993.
Well, to set up the game, we have to go back to the year before when they got there and proceeded to get just absolutely waxed by Notre Dame. BC arrived South Bend a year later, scene of the crime, and proceeded to actually throttle Notre Dame on their own field. And this was a Notre Dame team that was number 1 in the nation, had beaten Florida State the week before. They were really counting their chickens before they were hatched because they were all planning on being in the national championship game.
And then Notre Dame, 3 touchdowns. It's seemingly just like that. And now they're ahead.
At this point, I'm sitting next to Jay Mariotti on the other side from the Chicago Sun-Times, and he says to me, I think they scored too soon. And I looked at him, I said, you know what, I've seen this team practice their 2-minute, and I think you're right. Well, sure enough, BC gets the ball. They have a series of events that really helped them.
And then there were only a couple of first downs away from potential field goal range.
Which sets up this field goal for David Gordon.
All right, David Gordon has missed a field goal earlier in the year that would have beaten Northwestern at home. He's not a great kicker. He's an okay, adequate. If they could have found somebody better, they would have found him. They would have used him kind of guy, But he's what they got.
So here he was, a chance to redeem himself for that kick, lining up a kick against number 1 Notre Dame.
And I remember there were only 2 possibilities. There were only 2 in my mind: no good or blocked. The third possibility is not in my mind. It's just not a part of the scenario.
I was watching a game with my daughter, and I said, this is what makes sports so great. This moment is going to make sports great one way or the other. Because if it goes through the uprights, this is the biggest upset that BC certainly has had in a long time. And if it doesn't go through, then you're going to see and I didn't even finish my sentence. The kick goes through the uprights. She's going nuts.
And the only way I knew that that ball was good because of my angle in the press box was the reaction of all the players, and in particular, Pete Kendall, who ran towards the end zone, just like a raving lunatic waving. But the reaction that startled me the most was that of Bob Ryan, who was sitting next to me. Bob stands up and he just shouts,
"They won. Oh, hot. Now what do? I wasn't ready to write that story. I had to oh bleep, they won. Oh my God.
The football that traveled through the uprights, as it so happens, landed in the hands of these 2 students from Thayer Academy in Braintree, I think. They were chased outside the stadium, and they wound up meeting their parents at the Basilica Notre Dame for Mass. And one of the kids took the ball, took communion with the football hidden underneath his sweatshirt. And so he goes and he smuggles the football out of Notre Dame, And he presents it to David Gordon at the football banquet, and it sits there now in their trophy case at BC.
There's Bobby Orr, scoring that goal in that picture. You know the one. Seems to have been tripped. Flying through the air, May 10th, 1970. Seems to have won the Stanley Cup.
At precisely 5:10 yesterday afternoon, Boston Garden started rocking with a delirious tumult that surely must have sent tremors down into the foundation of the old building. The shock waves from that initial celebration undoubtedly were carried far into the night, because the ear-shattering din was set off by the Bruins' first Stanley Cup triumph in 29 years. Tom Fitzgerald, May 11th, 1970.
Play underway. The first team to score wins the game. Here's Picard.
One of the main things about covering sports is you have to know the people involved. And having covered Bobby for a few years prior to that, you knew that when he was flying down the ice, as he was in that instance, and it was a basic give and go. He gave the puck to Derek. Derek gave it right back to him. And the puck was in the net before Glenn Hall had a chance. You just had a feeling that something big was going to happen here, and it did.
Tried a shot that was wide of Keenan, cleared it but not out. Bobby Orr behind the net to Sanderson. Orr! Bobby Orr scores, and the Boston Bruins have won the Stanley Cup.
When he scored that famous goal, you've seen the picture a million times, flying. He was in flight. Why, just terrific.
Bobby Orr, their 22-year-old sensation, scores after 40 seconds of overtime.
There's Jim Lonborg on the final day in 1967. Are they ripping his clothes off?
As the ball came down Enrico Petrocelli's glove for the last and final out, the town went up in the air like a beautiful balloon. Perhaps it will never come down. Red Sox euphoria is a gas that can keep you higher than helium. Bud Collins, October 2nd, 1967.
The circulation manager of the Globe called me and said, the Red Sox win the pennant, the last day. How many extra copies do you think we should print? And I said to him, 50,000. He said, are you crazy? I said, Danny, the city's gone nuts. They'll buy anything that sounds Red Sox.
Everybody was crazy about the Red Sox. And I think that was the start of what Dan Shaughnessy calls Red Sox Nation.
Well, the whole season, the whole 1967 season was wild, but it was culminated on that Sunday when they won the pennant.
We know this much. The winner of the game is going to at least be in a tie, and the loser is out. And it's Dean Chance with his 20-13 record, a 20-12 record against Jim Lonborg, 21-9 in the last day of the season. And nothing, fifth inning. Lonborg leads off with a bunt.
And the angle that I had it from, you see the bunt going down. You can also see the third baseman playing way back. You can see the scoreboard behind him. So you knew the situation was all in the picture, And they rallied in that inning, and they eventually won the game.
I remember the last out was a pop-up caught in the infield.
Little soft pop-up. Petrocelli will take it. He does. The ball game is over. The Red Sox win it.
My dad and I watched the last 3 outs at the bottom of Section 1, and we ran on the field.
Everybody went crazy, and people came onto the field. Lonborg, everybody was mobbed.
By the time we got to the infield, Lonborg had been carried off.
People took swaths of the turf and the field and the bases and everything. They wanted to have these souvenirs, but it was pure ecstasy, euphoria.
Now the best part is what happened afterward. Still haven't won the pennant. Don't know what the Tigers have lost. Have to lose the second game of this doubleheader in order for the Red Sox to win the pennant. This is not like it was today with internet, instant Palm Pilots, blackberries, blueberries, juiceberries. None of that.
They had to go into the clubhouse and wait and listen to the radio to see how Detroit was doing.
And we just sat around for like 3 hours listening to this game. And finally, the Angels beat the Tigers, and it was over. And all hell broke loose at that point. And it was quite a scene. And Mr. Yockey was going around, hugging everybody, and he was thrilled. Of course, Yaz was the leader of that group.
There's Dave Henderson in that playoff game against the California Angels. Seems to be a well-hit ball. Might have a chance.
When the curtain comes down on the Red Sox season, this will be remembered as their finest hour. They came, they battled, and they survived in the American League Championship Series with one of the most dramatic comebacks in Boston baseball history. Larry Whiteside, October 13th, 1986.
The playoffs turned out to be terrific. And they really weren't very terrific for 4 games. I mean, Roger had the 3-0 lead in game 4, and he got in trouble, and then Schiraldi couldn't hold it. They lose the game 4-3. So now they're down 3-1, and everybody's throwing the goodbye Red Sox. And then comes the great game 5. Armas gets hurt, and then David Henderson comes in, tips the ball over the fence.
People probably thought he should have caught it because it is his glove.
As it deflects off his glove, and the Angels lead.
But he made up for it later in the game.
To left field, and deep and down he goes back, and it's gone! Unbelievable! That's second only to Fisk.
David Henderson became a star that day. He earned his own chapter in Red Sox lore, and he hit not 1, but 2 momentous home runs. And the best part about Dave Henderson was he was clueless. He didn't know about all this curse. He didn't know about the Red Sox postseason failures. He was new, he was filling in, he was a wonderful, friendly guy. He was just riding along on this cloud. And to me, that was the best part about him. He was the innocence of baseball that no one else in the city of Boston had. But he was the innocent one, and that's why he was the successful one, probably.
The comeback in Game 5 in '86 was tremendous. I think even the Angels were. I mean, the Angels just mailed it in. They weren't even close those last 2 games. That thing was over.
After Game 7, I walked outside of Fenway Park, and who do I run into but Reggie Jackson? So we went to Copperfield's to have a couple of beers. And Reggie kept saying to me, you know, I can't believe that a lot of these players stayed in California. They never showed up for these last 2 games. This team is a disgrace. That was a great moment. I mean, he was so angry about that team losing.
There's Pedro, warming up on October 11th, 1999. What's he doing in the bullpen?
It may not be possible in the span of 3 games to make up for nearly a century's worth of disappointment. But last night at Jacobs Field, in completing one of the most improbable comebacks in postseason history, the Boston Red Sox made a case for short memories and living for the moment. Gordon Eads, October 12, 1999.
Getting into the Cleveland series for the Red Sox in '99, they were carrying this enormous weight of not having won a playoff game in so long, and having lost, it was 12-14 in a row, starting with the Buckner game. It starts there.
And the Red Sox, just winning a playoff game was like getting to be an issue.
So now here they are in '99, and they're up against the wall, and all of a sudden they turn it the other way, and they come home, they get 1 million hits against the Indians, and then of course they go to Cleveland for the 5th game.
At that point, Pedro not only was pitching on fumes, we didn't think he could pitch at all. I remember, probably 45 minutes before the game, double checking with Joe Kerrigan was the pitching coach at the time. Any chance? Nah, it's not going to happen.
And it's another slugfest for 3 innings.
Swing and a shot deep to right center. Way back! Way back! Grand slam!
And then, lo and behold, Pedro Martinez comes out of the bullpen, and we thought he was done for the year, on the shelf.
I think the Red Sox bullpen was in the right field corner, and seeing him come out of the bullpen and come in and just pitched amazing.
Tom Boswell, the Washington Post, noticed this, but the clock stopped at the stadium at Jacobs Field. Literally, time stood still when Pedro came out of the bullpen, and then he pitched 6 innings of no-hit baseball.
6 innings where his velocity probably didn't get above 86, 87 miles an hour.
That was one of those kind of years for Martinez. He had already created such an aura of invincibility around him. And the thing is, when you are as invincible as Pedro was that year, you start to believe it yourself. And I think Pedro went out there believing that he was bulletproof and proved to be.
finds the 0-2 pitch. Swing and a miss, strike three. The Red Sox have won it.
There was such drama in that game, and if ever there was something to set up, an ALCS in dramatic fashion, that was it. Come from behind in the game, come from behind in the series, have your star pitcher be the one who guts it out. You couldn't write the script better.
The best pitcher in baseball has been 6 no-hit innings in relief.
Fantastic finishes. Anything can happen. Anything at all. The reporters from other parts of the newspaper, especially Cityside, where fires and gun battles and grand cases of corruption spring up nightly, often deride the sports writer. They say he works in the toy department, a place where events are scheduled and news happens within a confined, predictable neighborhood. The sports writer fires back all the bromides that sport is life in microcosm. Any and all the events of the outside world happen also in his inside world. And he has his facts to prove it. Take the women's figure skating tryouts for the U.S. Olympic team in 1994. The biggest challenge was going to be describing the outfit the 24-year-old favorite from Stoneham was going to wear for her routine. Then some thug whacked Nancy Kerrigan across the knee with a tire iron, and the writers were covering the most celebrated mugging of all time.
Nancy and Tanya, you don't even need last names anymore. What happened was it was the Olympic year, 1994, and Nancy Kerrigan, local girl from Stoneham, is the girl. Tanya Harding used to be the girl. She was a national champion, but this particular year it was going to be Nancy. And I'm writing a big story at the national championships, the new Nancy, big story. And what'll happen very often is your colleagues, if they know you're writing a story, will play a prank on you. So John Johnson from Newsday comes up, and I'm just about to send this huge story Nancy Kerrigan on the paper. And he says, hey, you hear someone hit Kerrigan with a crowbar? I said, yeah, ha, ha, ha. This had never happened before. I mean, that one ice queen knocks off another ice queen. And that caused about a month-long saga. Will Nancy be ready for the Olympics? Will Tanya be at the Olympics? What's going to happen there? And I remember when they had their first practice together. But we had a great photo by John Tlumaki of our photo that shot over Tanya Harding's shoulder and saw Nancy. It looked like they were gunslingers. There was one moment where they were facing each other. It was like high noon.
Then there was the 84th Boston Marathon. The winner of the women's division was a young lady from New York named Rosie Ruiz. Except no one had ever heard of her, and no one had seen her in the race, and she didn't seem to be very tired.
That year, I had been assigned to do the women's winner. And unlike now, the women's race was kind of folded into the men's race. So it could be very hard to figure out who the first woman was, where she was, if she had short hair or a baseball cap like Joan Benoist used to wear. It was hard. So I'm at the finish line a couple of minutes before I expect I'm going to see the women's winner. And this kind of chubby woman with a headband kind of staggers across the finish line. And I'm saying, who's she? No one knew this woman. So the media starts asking her questions about splits and this and that and training and how many miles. And her answers were off the wall.
I don't think Rosie wanted to cheat and win the marathon. I think everyone accepts that. Rosie wanted to cheat enough to be in the picture. Got herself somehow to Kenmore Square and picked a spot to enter the race. Well, her mistake was not waiting to see a woman go by. She saw enough men go by, figured it was time to jump in. She jumped in, and lo and behold, she won.
And this story went on for days because Will Cloney, who was the old race director, what do you do when the winner's a fraud and no one can prove that she ran the race? And how do you prove that she didn't run the race? And finally, Will had to say, we have to regretfully say she didn't run the race. And the worst thing was that Jackie Garreau, who did win the race, they hold a little finish for her a couple days later, and they bring her down from Quebec, and she breaks the tape in front of 18 people. But when you say Rosie Ruiz now, everyone knows that is a synonym for fraud.
Fraudulent finishes are one thing. But what about a finish that never happened? On May 24th, 1988, the lights went out in the third period of a Stanley Cup thriller, the Bruins against Edmonton.
I was able to score 2 tickets that night for my husband and his brother, so they were really excited to go into that game. And as everybody knows, Edmonton had just scored a goal.
Cleared across, Smith in, shot, scores! A deflected shot, maybe Gretzky.
I do remember it was Dave Shea making the call about just before the lights went out.
And just couldn't get the handle on it to clear the zone, and bang, it's back on Gretzky's stick, and the nightmare begins.
Once your body's standing still, the puck drifts away from you. This goes to an under.
Is that power has gone out at Boston Garden.
Vince was sitting next to Montville when the lights went out, and as soon as the lights went out, Vince said, "Start writing." And Lee said, "About what? About darkness?" And Vince said, "Well, yeah."
Vince Doria says to me, "What do you think of this?" I said, "Well, Vince, I can tell you this. If they're not up in like the next 2 to 3 minutes, the night's over." He said, "You're crazy." I said, I don't know the reason behind this, but it has to do with the dynamics of the engineering of these lights. But I can tell you, within a matter of minutes, if they aren't back on, they're going to have to clear this place out." And sure enough, that's what happened.
They tried to evacuate the building because they needed to get everybody out of there for safety reasons. And they thought they had succeeded for the most part. But we were walking through this, very dark, eerie building. And I was walking along with I think it might have been Kevin DuPont. And all of a sudden, from behind the chairs, these 2 guys jump out and scream, "Boo!" And they look at us, and it's my husband and his brother. They had hid in the men's room.
By that period, trust me, they didn't need to have it underscored that the building was antiquated and did have to be replaced. Just a safety issue, it had to be replaced. But that ended up being the maraschino cherry if they needed one.
There was a public works scandal of sorts in Foxborough on December 12, 1982. Seems Pat's coach Ron Meyer called in a snowplow, a miniature snowplow, to clear a spot for a game-winning kick by John Smith. Seems the Miami Dolphins howled. Seems the driver of the miniature snowplow was a resident of the Norfolk House of Correction. Sports writers as investigators discovered that fact.
The play came right out of the heavy equipment catalog. Goes by the name of John Deere 314. And bless your snowflakes was the best sweep ever run by the Patriots. And the guy who ran the sweep that beat the despised Dolphins was on leave for the day from the Norfolk State Prison. It's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me, Pete Rozelle. Michael Madden, December 13th, 1982.
And to this day, Don Shula, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, coaches in NFL history, will not say the words Ron Meyer. He always says, "That coach, that coach."
The sports writer has covered punches that no one else seemed to see. Cassius Clay knocking out Sonny Liston in 1965 in Lewiston, Maine.
A handsome young woman in a lacy pink silk cocktail dress leaped up and screamed. She was Sonji Clay, cohabitant of the one-story cement block palace in northwest Miami, and she screamed, "I feel beautiful. My man is king of the world." Bud Collins, May 26, 1965.
Well, one of the unfortunate moments in the history of boxing in Boston was that Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston never fought their second fighter as they were supposed to. By then he had changed his name. He had announced he was a Muslim. There were people freaking out over that situation.
And then the fight never happened in Boston because the district attorney chased it out of town to try to get some publicity for himself.
Muhammad Ali comes out and hits him with either the phantom punch, or the anchor punch, as Muhammad has claimed he hit him with all these years.
From my seat, I saw it was a very good right hand, but was it enough to knock him out?
Only Sonny Liston knows how hard that punch landed. And Sonny's gone to his great reward, so he's not going to tell anybody. But if you watch the tape, when he gets hit, you'll see his left foot, which is his back foot, come up in the air. And that means you got hit with a shot that didn't feel very good.
He went down. A good enough punch to knock him down, but I don't think Liston wanted it. He saw Ali glowering at him above him, and the timekeeper lost the count.
I know he got hit with a shot that raised his back foot, and that was enough to convince him, I think, that on this night, I'll retire.
The truth is that the sports writer covers all the emotions of the outside world. Even in the framework of sport, he covers entire lives packed into headline careers. There was a plane crash to cover when Rocky Marciano died in an Iowa cornfield.
What very few people know was at that time, he was considering a comeback. They had been talked about. He'd been in the gym a little bit. A lot of people say, he was never really going to do it. Well, whether he was, he wasn't, no one will ever know. But what had enticed him into that was that Muhammad Ali was now he was still Cassius Clay at the time, and he was rising, and they put together a computer fight between Rocky Marciano, the undefeated heavyweight, 49-0, and this young, brash guy, Cassius Clay. And they did some stand-up sort of TV filming for it. And then they had a computer do it. And Rocky Marciano knocked out Muhammad Ali. And that, at least so the computer said. If you asked Ali, he'll tell you, I don't think so. But that put a little seed in his mind that, maybe I was a young guy when I retired, early 30s, maybe I want to come back. But, tragic circumstances intervened, and that never happened.
There have been tragedies. The first, literally a Greek tragedy. Harry Aganis of Lynn, Massachusetts, an All-American football player at Boston University, on the verge of a big breakthrough in his second season with the Red Sox. Suddenly, the prime of his life ended by a blood clot, too young, at the age of 25. Just medical news, just sadness, when Tony Conigliaro, the pride of Lynn and East Boston, was first hit in the eye with a fastball, recovered, and then died an early and prolonged death.
You couldn't be more local boy makes good than Tony C. St. Mary's of Lynn, Swampscott, hits a home run in his first game as a Red Sox as a 19-year-old kid in 1964. Lived at home the whole first year as a rookie with the Red Sox. I mean, hey, Mom, I'm going off to the ballpark. Come on. Just couldn't make this stuff up.
There's a drive by Conigliaro, and it is out of here. What a bomb he is. Conigliaro hits a home run, his first time at bat at Fenway Park.
Anyway, Tony sees up and he gets hit by Jack Hamilton, and who knew? You knew it was bad. It changed Tony's life forever and the career, as we know, and the saga of Tony that would end 23 years later with his premature death.
There was medical news and controversy when Darryl Stingley was paralyzed in 1978.
In camp that year, Darryl Stingley looked like he was going to have an incredible season. He and Stanley Morgan were going to be the greatest receiving corps that the Patriots had had. And they went out west to play a couple exhibition games. They're going to stay out there for a week. They're going to play the Rams and the Raiders.
Leading up to that exhibition game against the Patriots, Tatum was trying to negotiate a new contract with Al Davis. And Davis had continued to tell him that he was slowing down, that he wasn't hitting the way he used to hit.
And I remember sitting up in the press box, and this was a meaningless preseason game, and Stingley came across the middle. And Steve Grogan was the quarterback, and threw a ball was kind of rising. And I remember Stingley trying to go to get it, and Tatum coming right across and hitting him under here, just like this. Snapped his neck. And you knew right away it was bad. Right away it was bad. And Darryl just lay motionless. And I remember later on, the doctors being quizzed about this. How long will Darryl be out? Or, will he play again this year? He said, you don't understand. Daryl's not going to walk again. And what made Darryl bitter more than anything else was Jack never called and said, I'm sorry. It was a bad hit. Sorry for what happened to you. But that really struck home to me that, this is one violent game.
What about a star that never had a chance to shine? Len Bias, we hardly knew you.
That was a draft that was supposed to be loaded with a lot of players, and the Celtics were going to pick 2.
It was the all-time coup. Best team ever gets the best player in the country. What a twofer.
Everything he read about Len Bias was great. Comes from a nice family, good kid, exactly the kind of guy you want, because Red was always big on character. He drafted as much for that as he did for talent. So they draft Len and they bring him up, I think on a Monday or Tuesday. And my job is to write the definitive Len Bias feature. Go down to Washington, talk to his old coaches, talk to everyone you could find. And the next morning, I'm in my hotel and I'm calling his home to try to, figure out what time, where, etc. The line's busy for about an hour.
And I remember I was drying my hair in the morning and I had the radio on, and they said, the Boston Celtics draft pick Len Bias has, and I thought, and I remember throwing the hairdryer and saying, they traded him. I can't believe they traded him. And then they said, has died of a cocaine, apparent drug, and I went, oh my Lord.
And finally, the phone rings, and it's my wife, Elaine, saying, what was the name of that guy you're supposed to interview today? Was it Len Bias? I said, yeah, did he call? She said, no, he's dead. I said, he's dead? I remember going to the hospital where they've taken him, and they're wheeling him out. And I remember these two big feet just sticking out from under. And it was, what happened here?
They had him for a day, and it would have forever changed what happened to the careers of Bird, McHale, Parrish probably. They would have won the championship in '87.
I remember talking to his high school coach. And this is before the death, no one knew it. And he said, the thing about Leonard is, he's always on the extreme. If he's with the good guys, he's the best guy. If he's with bad guys, he's the worst guy.
We were interviewing a number of the coaches of the prospective guys. And I can still hear Lefty Drizel on the subject of Len Bias on our radio show saying, Leonard's only vice is ice cream. And I always remember that. Leonard's only vice was ice cream. Well, it turns out he had another vice, and it killed him.
It's one thing to be gone before you started, but it's another to be taken away.
So I went over to meet this Reggie Lewis. He hadn't done an interview in Boston yet, and he was nervous, and he was shy. And I walked away with an empty notebook, but with a smile on my face. Jackie McMullen, July 28, 1993.
I covered Reggie Lewis. I think I might have covered every college game he ever played. When I first went to the Globe, my job was to cover Northeastern basketball and Boston College basketball. So by the time that Reggie got to the Celtics, I think I had seen him more than anybody. And I knew him very well. And the game that night against the Charlotte Hornets, when he fell, Dan and I kept watching it on the replay. And it didn't look right. It didn't look right to us.
There was something very strange about that whole night. In the pregame, I was going back and forth to the two locker rooms to talk to different players. And I never saw Reggie more hyper. He was absolutely bouncing up and down on his toes when he was talking. And he was not a talkative guy, he was a very quiet guy. And then watching him on the court in the first quarter, I remember he took a shot from the right corner and he got the rebound from the left corner. It was like he was like a jackrabbit.
In the first period of that game, Reggie was running around like a madman. He was running around like a guy trying to shut all the windows in a thunderstorm before the rain gets in the house. That's not his style. And I was taken by this. What is he doing? And the next thing you know, he is sitting on the floor right in front of me. I mean, right in front of me on the floor, holding his chest.
And I remember Jackie coming up to me at halftime, and she goes, "There's something wrong, I said, well, what do you mean wrong? I mean, he's not playing, he's not going to play. She goes, no, there's something worse than that. She sensed that there was something going on, and Shaughnessy actually came up to where I was sitting too and said the same thing a little later on, said, there's something seriously wrong with him, and we're going to have a pretty big story on our hands here.
If you remember, he got a first opinion, and then the second opinion was this Dr. Mudge saying that it was this benign condition.
We will make sure that as he is followed through practice and begins to start playing competitively again, that it will be perfectly safe for him to be as active as he wants to on the court.
I remember going to that press conference, and I remember standing in the back with Dave Gavitt up there and Reggie up there, and everybody's smiling, and I'm thinking, I just talked to the dream team doctors, the best medical people, maybe in the world, telling me 2 days ago that this kid had a potentially fatal heart condition and should never play basketball again and needed a defibrillator implanted in his chest. Now I'm watching this doctor up there telling everybody that it's a benign fainting condition. And to me, it was surreal. I kept thinking, what is going on here?
The night that he died, I remember being at the hospital in Waltham with I think Peter was there, I think Jack McMullen was there. And they finally had a press conference there, and they announced that he had passed away.
That story is the worst story I've ever worked on in the history of Boston sports. There was not one good day about it. Nothing was ever good about it. There was nothing satisfying about it for anybody. Everyone was tarnished by it. And to this day, I've talked to Bob Ryan and Jackie McMullen about this. We all hate that story.
It shook, it shook this town up. That funeral on that sweltering day in August when it was laid out and had the service over at Northeastern was a memorable day. And that funeral procession, people white kids wearing that Reggie Lewis jersey all over the town. I mean, this guy touched everybody. I mean, he was a unifying kind of sports figure, and he's missed to this day, no question.
From the great John L. to Pedro and Tom Brady, there always have been stars in Boston.
Boston has been blessed with some pretty outstanding athletes. And when you have great athletes, great things are going to happen around them. Whether they're all good, or maybe there's a bad one here or there, but it's going to be a great scene.
There have been stars who talked, stars who didn't talk, stars who grumbled and complained. Hello, Ted Williams. The population wants to know these stars, wants to know them better than next-door neighbors or second cousins. Biographies have to be written day to day, year to year, unfolding in installments. What's Larry Bird really like? The sports writer has to find out, sometimes in intriguing ways.
Larry Bird's hand was messed up, and he was taping his hand in practice. And it was like this. He had tape here, and he played the whole practice that way. And after practice, I said, you're not going to play the game with your hand taped like that tomorrow night. And he always called me Scoop. I said, Scoop, I could tape my whole hand up, make more shots than you.
Dan was a pretty good basketball player. He had a little bit of a shot, he didn't move that well, but he could shoot. He says, let's have a free throw shooting contest, you and me, Bird says. And I'll take my hand, and I'll take some tape here, and I'll just tape it up into a big maw, essentially. And we'll shoot 100 free throws.
So the trainer came over and taped his whole hand up. We went in rounds of 10, and we each made 6 out of 10 the first time. He was literally pushing the ball with his fists like that. And the second round, I was rebounding his shots, and he said, I got this figured out, and he did.
From that point on, Bird made either like 9 or 10 or 10 of 10 out of each one. And of course, Dan fell apart.
So now I go back out there, and I'm seeing $5 bills flying through the air every time we let go here. I called Vince and I said, listen, I got this great story about how these players can adjust, and Larry's taping his hand, and it was kind of I kind of made a little wager on the thing, and he said, how much did you lose? I said, 160.
I said, Dan, forget your other story. Write that one. That's going to be the best Red story in Boston tomorrow. And when we went to the game that night, I mean, every writer outside of the city, that's all anybody was talking about.
Got to the gym early. Larry was out shooting like he always was, and he came over with his hand out. Gave him his 820s, and he rolled it up and put it in his sock, and he played with my money in his shoe that night. I felt bad the whole night watching him run up and down the floor with my $160 in his shoe.
The first half, Bird got it! The other thing that speaks to Larry is he'd take your money. He took Shaughnessy's $100, and then he was taking, he says, I hope your kids will be able to eat. So, again, it's a quirky kind of story, but, Larry Bird had such confidence.
Somebody would get on the floor and Bird would say, you know what I'm going to do tonight? I'm going to torch you for 20 and 15. First, I'm going to take you down the corner. I'm going to up fake you twice, and I'm going to drive to the basket on you. And then he'd go out and he'd do it.
Again, we go to an isolation move. Bird got it, and he got a foul from McKeskey.
Larry was in the middle of a pretty impressive foul shot streak. He had made like 50 or 60 in a row. The record was 86, Calvin Murphy at the time, and he was getting close. He came over and said, what are you writing about, Scoop? And I said, I'm doing your free throw streak, so don't screw it up and miss one tonight, because my first edition story is going to be about this stupid streak you have here. So, sure enough, in the first half, he gets fouled, and he's got 2 shots, and he makes the first one, and he looks over and winks at me before he takes the second shot. I mean, that's how relaxed he was, That kind of thing wouldn't happen today. That was a moment.
What about Bobby Orr? How did he do those things he did? What was he thinking? Was he a good guy? A bad guy? What was he really like?
The better he played, the harder it was to find him in the dressing room after the game. He was like he wanted to deflect all the credit to the other players rather than take it onto himself. But if your deadlines allowed it, and if you were patient enough, he would come and he would talk and he'd answer all your questions.
His 100th point of the season.
No other defenseman in the National Hockey League history has ever done it.
I saw virtually all of Orr's career, and Bobby Orr was, by my estimation, the greatest player of his time. And I really haven't seen all these discussions about Orr versus Gretzky and Orr versus Lemieux, but I don't think any of them have stacked up to him.
I remember once, it was later on in his career, I think Don Cherry might have been the coach, and the Bruins went on the power play. And Orr called all the players together at the blue line and just pointed around what they were supposed to do. And in 10 seconds they've got a goal. And Cherry's just shaking his head like this. How did he do that?
Ted Williams, Teddy Ballgame. He hated the sports writers, didn't he? They hated him, didn't they? What was it like to cover Teddy Ballgame?
We had a difficult start, Ted Williams. I was assigned to do the clubhouse story, very excited about it, and ran into the clubhouse right after the game, and a booming voice, unmistakable. I'd never met the man, but Ted Williams' voice was unmistakable. And he said, "What's that 9-letter word doing in here?" He was a childhood idol of mine, and I was paralyzed. The trainer for the Red Sox was a kindly man, and he said, "That's all right." He said, "He talks like that to everybody, but you better wait here for about 10 minutes. So I did, and after that, Williams, we had an uneasy relationship, as all the writers did.
The guy who covered Ted Williams and the Red Sox at the time was a guy named Hy Hurwitz. He was the baseball writer, and Ted got mad at him once. Hy Hurwitz was a little guy and a former Marine, just like Ted. And Ted once got mad at Hy Hurwitz, and he said, if you were a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier, I'd knock your block off. And Hy Hurwitz said, "If I was, you wouldn't dare."
I'd never met him. Here's my chance. It was like 1987 or something. And he plopped down, and he was right next to me. And there was probably 20, 30 guys around the table, and tape recorders rolling, pens, notes perched. And he looked around, and no one would say anything. And he says, "Scared to death, aren't you?" Well, yeah. But then he was great. And he enjoyed being the loud curmudgeon. He was very good at it. I think that you can make a case that Ted Williams was the largest newsmaker in Massachusetts in the 20th century, with the exception of John F. Kennedy. I think after the president, Ted's probably it. In terms of the number of stories written, just the volume, and the level of interest in the readers had in the subject, he's it.
Two boxers from Brockton, both champions, captured public attention in different generations. Rocky Marciano, Marvelous Marvin Hagler.
The hard and angry right fist of challenger Rocky Marciano beat Jersey Joe Walcott into a senseless lump on the ring canvas, divesting him of the World Heavyweight Championship after 43 seconds of fighting in the 13th round of a battle which was drenched with blood and drama. Jerry Nason, September 24th, 1952.
Well, a lot of people look at Rocky Marciano today and say, well, he wouldn't have beaten this guy, he wouldn't have beaten that guy, look at how small he was 188 pounds, he wasn't really a heavyweight, blah, blah, blah. All you need to know about Rocky Marciano is he was 49-0, and nobody else is 49-0. He was just a hard guy from a hard place, Brockton, Massachusetts. He was the Brockton blockbuster for a reason. What he got from God was thunder. He had thunder, and you can't teach somebody thunder. When he hit you, you were hurt, and you stayed hurt. Well, he finally got his title shot against Jersey Joe Walcott. Tremendous fight. Marciano suffered a terrible cut here on his nose. He was bleeding terribly. It looked like Walcott was going to box his way to a 15-round decision. And then he got hit with what is considered technically the most perfect punch ever thrown. And he went straight down like he'd been hit by a sniper shot, just boom. And you could have counted to 10, you could have counted to 100, you could have counted to 110. He was not getting up. And the last image you have of Jersey Joe Walcott in that fight is one arm sort of draped on the ropes as he's laying there on the floor. Marciano is the heavyweight champion.
He was oblivious to the bedlam that surrounded him. Plastic bottles and cans and a shower of beer landed everywhere. Marvin never even noticed. he was the middleweight champion of the world. Lee Montville, September 28, 1980.
Marvin Hagler is a guy who came to Brockton, the home of Rocky Marciano, where all the history of boxing in New England really began. He came there from Newark.
And Marvin was just a tremendous physical specimen. I've often said that of all the people I've covered in sports, Marvin and Roger Clemens were the most dedicated athletes I've ever been around. I remember in his early career going down to Provincetown where he would train. At 5 in the morning, every morning, he would get up, put on these construction boots, and run the sand dunes in P-Town, 6-7 miles. It was almost like watching a Rocky movie live, you know. He was just an amazing guy, and just to watch his rise from a guy I knew who was really nothing, it was just a construction worker boxing, to becoming the middleweight champion.
There was a great local hook there because he always stayed with the Petronelli brothers, and he always had local guys around him, and so it was kind of like going with Marvin off to see the world, you know.
When he got to London for the second title shot, Alan Minter was in a bad situation, whether he knew it or he didn't know it, because Marvin Hagler was coming there to do more than win the fight. He was coming there to remove all doubt and all judges pencils. There were going to be no reason for pencils and a lot of a reason for Band-Aids. They rang the first bell, and Hagler came out there and made clear to him right from the start, this is going to be your worst nightmare.
Just rips his face apart, and they stop the fight because poor Minter is just ripped apart.
But unfortunately, even that glory of that night was stolen from him because the fans began to riot when they stopped the fight. They began to pelt the ring.
Well, all these guys that had carried all these beers up, they've only had time to drink 4 or 5 beers. So what do you do with the other 16, 18 beers? They started throwing them, and they're coming down and coming down.
And ultimately, they had to cover his head, have his people all around him, and rush him out of the ring.
And the three of us pick up our typewriters, and we have it over our heads. And Vito Antifermo, who was the former middleweight champion of the world, says, "Follow me." He's the former middleweight champion of the world, so we follow him. And we're walking through, and people are shoving and pushing. And the guy just kind of touches Vito like this. And Vito turns around, wacko, and the guy goes flying over. And to this day, I hope the guy somehow learned that he was knocked out by the former middleweight champion of the world, not just some Italian-American guy with a lot of scar tissue.
He never got the belt in the ring, which is the normal tradition of boxing. So even when he first won the middleweight title, he didn't get that moment that he wanted. And that became a focus of his entire career, really, that he never got his due for a long, long time, and that was the fuel that really drove him.
You know, he had that tremendous fight with Tommy Hearns, and the controversial fight with Leonard, and he was a lot of fun. Destruction and destroy, that was his motto. I mean, like the noun and the verb, I never figured out how he got that.
You know all the names. Russell, Flutie, Brady, Nomar, Patino, Parcells. What were they, what are they really like?
Russell was just a tremendous competitor, and he always, if you went into the locker room before the game, you could hear him vomiting. Not very pleasant, but he was nervous, and that was just a Russell custom. He didn't do it on purpose, and then he would go out and play a magnificent game.
The Doug Flutie phenomenon, to me, to this day, is still just astounding. I remember going to do an interview with him when he turned pro, and I went to his house in Natick, which he had just built, and it was like a little kid's, it was like Tom Hanks in Big. He had a pool table, pinball machines, you know, a pop-a-shot game. He was like a big kid, and that's how I always thought of him.
I was talking to a former teammate of his recently, and he said something that I thought just pretty much summed Tom Brady up. He's like, you know what, Brady is just so cocky. It's like you can't tell him, anything, another word for anything. You know what I mean? You can't convince him that they're not going to win.
Nomar would accuse the grounds crew of messing up the ground in front of him so he'd make more errors. He told teammates and his manager that he thought that the club had bugged his phone. It's too bad. He just got so angry at the Red Sox, and it overwhelmed everything. I like Nomar, but I think he became such a dark cloud.
I was there for the famous, Larry Bird's not walking through this door, Kevin McHale's not walking through this door. And I just remember all of us kind of saying to ourselves, what did someone ask to prompt this? It was sort of an unprompted response, and we were all sort of shocked. I don't know, that obviously for many people typifies the Pitino regime. He was very much a micromanager. What I remember was talking to some of the assistants in the office, and he had his assistants and the people in the executive office on diets. He not only wanted, a well-conditioned team and things to go a certain way on the court, but he had very much a way that he wanted the organization to look. And he had incentives for certain people to lose weight.
Bill Parcells lived up to his image every second he was in Boston. He was a larger-than-life figure who knew what he was doing and clearly turned the Patriots around.
I was with Bob Kraft, the owner of the team, the night before the draft in his downtown office. And he was explaining his side of the problems of dealing with a powerful personality like Parcells, and that ultimately things come to a head. And the thing I've never forgotten is, he said to me finally, eventually you need to understand the difference between being an owner and being a renter.
They want you to cook the dinner, at least they ought to let you shop for some of the groceries. Yeah?
But one of the things that happened that summer was Kraft brought a bunch of his highest paying advertisers, signage guys from the stadium, all that down. And he had told Parcells about it. And he'd asked them to come by, at the end of practice, just sort of say hello, no big deal. Well, not only does he not do that, Kraft had all these guys set up right near, there's 2 practice fields at Bryan College, near the practice field where they always practice in the afternoon practice. He comes out with the team, takes them all the way to the other field, and they practice on the far field. And so it was that, it had become that kind of relationship at that point. And there's no question that when it was over, Bill Parcells understood the difference between being an owner and being a renter.
The sports writer is there for the beginning of an or, the arrival in 1978 of a Raymond Bourque, and a Larry Bird.
First day of practice, I was standing next to Harry Sinden, and the players were coming out on the ice, and this kid came along, and he had a swagger, not a bad thing, but the swagger that great athletes have, the way they carry themselves. And I tapped Harry and I said, "Who's that?" And he says, "That's Ray Bourque." He said, "I got goosebumps running up my spine."
Cuts in as the shot by Bourque deflected off Middleton.
Red Auerbach did not look as if he had swallowed the canary. He looked as if he had just consumed the entire aviary. "I feel," he cooed, "that we did as good a job as we possibly could." What Red did in yesterday's NBA draft was acquire the best college player in the country. Bob Ryan, June 10th, 1978.
Well, the Boston Celtics made history today, signing Larry Bird, the college All-American from French Lick, Indiana. The new instant millionaire is a 6'9" basketball player from Indiana State. Bird's starting pay will be $650,000 a year.
Larry Bird was playing in an NIT game in his home arena in Terre Haute for Indiana State. We saw Larry Bird, and then for the first time, and he won the game with a game-winning basket against Illinois State. I was totally and completely taken by him. The first thing he does, as I'll never forget, was get a rebound, defensive rebound, and from about 3 steps beyond midcourt, Larry came off the dribble, cocked the ball, and threw about a 55-foot bullet underhand pass to Knicks, hitting him in the breadbasket for a layup. That's the first official act I saw Larry Bird perform. That was my introduction to Larry Bird. So the Red had 2 draft picks that year, and he was able to take Larry with the 6th pick in that draft and as an insurance policy. Would he have done that if he didn't have the 2nd pick? Probably not. Red will never admit that. I wouldn't admit it if I were Red, but probably not.
I forgot to tell Mr. Auerbach, but I would have played for nothing.
And the sports writer is there for the end, the retirement, the standing ovation wake. And they write the obituaries, sometimes elegantly.
Catcher Jim Pagliarone summed it up best when he said, That's the most magnificent farewell speech I ever saw. He wasn't making a grammatical error either, referring to the Ted Williams farewell speech before the game at Fenway Park. He meant that 8th inning homer, Ted's personal sundown cannon, marking the end of a super spectacular baseball career. Arthur Siegel, September 29th, 1960.
Wind up, here's the pitch. Williams swings, and there's a long drive to deep right. That ball is going, and it is gone. A home run for Ted Williams in his last time at bat in the Major League.
I have been asked many times this year what I will miss most about no longer playing.
And it wound up, the only two people left in the locker room after John Havlicek's last game were John Havlicek and I. And we walked out the door together, and he said, wait a minute. And he went back and he turned out the lights, which is kind of cool. I mean, kind of almost poetic, you know, that he'd done everything and now he turned out the lights and went home.
You gotta love Yaz. For a guy to spend his whole career in one town, that hasn't happened since. It's probably not gonna happen again in this age of free agency.
I thought his farewell, when he was the first guy to go out and do the lap around to the fans, he came back after that. And I can remember writing it. It's now dark. Look out, there's a line. He went and signed autographs for people in uniform for 2 hours after the game.
He did a press conference, and then he came out in the empty ballpark, and he had a bottle of champagne. He just toasted Fenway and drank the champagne. And there was nobody in there, just me and Yaz. It was great.
But Yaz was the first guy to say, you know what, I'd really like to thank the fans, and he did it all on his own, and that was a really special moment.
Ray at that time was wearing number 7, and it was the number that Esposito had set all his records in here and really had helped define that time of the Big Bad Bruins.
The way it was supposed to play out was the number was going to go up as number 7, and Ray was going to continue to wear number 7.
I said, you know, Ray, I said, you're really wearing Phil's number. He said, wait till you see what I do tonight.
Ray Bork is trying to wear 77 as number 7 is retired.
It was Ray's gesture. Ray presented that this is what he'd like to do. And really, there was no one more surprised than Phil himself. To see, you know, what is now an older guy, a guy who's in the Hall of Fame and has his career, he was reduced to a kid again. I thought that was neat.
The Larry Fest was everything one could have imagined. It was a parquet coronation, a high-top Woodstock. It was Boston basketball's Lifetime Achievement Award. Dan Shaughnessy, February 5th, 1993.
Ladies and gentlemen, number 33,
Larry Bird retirement was a special night.
It was amazing that they would have an event without a game. It was really extraordinary.
We all know the highlight. Without the question, the highlight is when Magic reveals the Celtic jersey, the great picture, and it was a wonderful night. He meant so much to the fans of Boston, and he loved the fans.
I leave tonight, and all I can say is thanks. Looking out here tonight and seeing all these people in here makes you feel like you're on top of the world. So I say good night, Boston, and may God bless each and every one of you. Good night.
Johnny Busick, I think, brought out his jersey and handed it to him, and somebody up in the balcony yelled, "Put it on!" So off came his suit coat, and he put it on, and the place went crazy.
I remember talking with an usher towards the end of Boston Garden's time, and I said to him, what's the greatest ovation you ever heard at the Boston Garden? And he said, the night Bobby Orr retired. He said, that was the biggest ovation I ever heard. He said, and he paused and he said, unless you count wrestling. You know, because wrestling is just noise and mayhem, and every week there's like a Bobby Orr retirement. It kind of puts it all in perspective.
I'm 51 years old. I've been writing stories for the Globe for 30 years. This is the one we waited for. It's the greatest story of all time in Boston sports. Nothing will ever be greater. This is the largest, most important, most historic moment in our professional lifetimes. No doubt about it.
No day-after-day story in the history of New England ever grabbed local attention the way the baseball events of 1 month, October of 2004, grabbed the entire population of Boston and New England. The accursed New York Yankees are felled in 7 games, the greatest comeback in baseball history. The Red Sox win the World Series for the first time in 86 years. Millions flock to Boston to celebrate. No protracted stretch of local excitement ever was as dramatic. Hands reached across generations. Neighbors found neighbors. When the Yankees alone fell, forget the ensuing events in St. Louis, it was as if an impacted wisdom tooth had been removed from every mouth. Tongues ran over the open hole in wonder.
Forevermore, the date goes down into the New England calendar as an official no school, no work, no mail delivery holiday in Red Sox Nation. Mark it down, October 20th. It will always be the day that Sox citizens were liberated from 8.5 decades of torment and torture at the hands of the New York Yankees and their fans. Boston baseball's Bastille Day. Dan Shaughnessy, October 21st, 2004.
The events unrolled over a period of 15 days, beginning with a 3-and-out romp over the Anaheim Angels.
Swing and a fly ball to left field. Weaver! The Red Sox are going to the American League Championship Series on the back of David Ortiz.
Then, the way everything changed so fast, so dramatically, was a wonder. For 1 game, 2 games, 3, loss after loss after loss. The pit for the Red Sox grew deeper and deeper against the Yankees. All of the old ghosts and horrors were revisited. The 2 worst possibilities after a season of building glory had materialized. Star pitcher Curt Schilling, the heart of the operation, was hurt, and the bats suddenly were not working.
Curt Schilling hasn't had a stinker all year where he just got routed, and in 3 innings, he's toast and gives up a tremendous amount of runs and hits. It's not him, so you know it's got to be an injury.
This guy was supposed to be the great equalizer between the Red Sox and the Yankees, and here he comes out in the first game in Yankee Stadium, gets KO'd after 2 innings. They're down 6 runs, and I think right there, the nation collectively held its breath and said, oh my God, what are we in for here? And then here Messina comes out. He sets down the first 19 in a row in game 1.
So they lose that one, and then Pedro starts, and it's just a frenzy in New York. And he invited this Who's Your Daddy thing on his own.
You know you're sending a good quality pitcher out there who might pitch a great game. However, the offsetting that is this increasing dramatic history he has with the Yankees, all negative. And he pitched well until the Olin home run.
Drive to deep right field. Weber! 3-0 New York.
The Red Sox aren't even getting any base runners. I mean, the only possible salvation was you are coming home.
The 3rd straight loss to the Yankees was a 19-8 destruction, a debilitating laugher.
The series returns to Fenway Park, and people are thinking, okay, this team had performed so well at home, that's going to swing this series back in Boston's favor. Instead, the opposite occurs, one of the most embarrassing games in the history of the franchise. If you walk down that concourse in those late innings, there weren't just bundled up Red Sox fans that were departing the premises. Hope itself was leaving the building.
No rational person could have felt good after Game 3. Anyone who says that they still had faith after Game 3, frankly, is someone that I wouldn't entrust to invest 6 cents with, because that's not rational thinking. They are dead.
Everybody is, you know, headed for the ledge. You know, they're lining up on the Tobin Bridge. The columnists are saying it's over. You know, forget about it. And yet the Red Sox, they're in the clubhouse and they're just like, you know, let's just keep rolling with this. You know, we're just the happy idiots and let's go. And they win.
The annual Passion Play seemed as if it were going to end without any passion at all. Then, in the 9th inning of Game 4, gates of invincibility opened that had been closed since 1918.
Kevin Millar, he sort of pulled me aside and he said, the pressure's on the Yankees tonight. He says, don't let the Red Sox win this game. Because you know what? We win this game, we got Pedro Martinez going tomorrow, we got Schilling going in 6. And if we win that, you can take that fraud stuff and put it to bed.
Derek Lowe was all that stood between the Red Sox and winter as we went into Game 4, and he was not scheduled to start that game. He comes out and pitches very credibly for the first 6 innings, kept them in the game.
But of course, in the 9th inning, the greatest closer in the history of baseball is on the mound, and they're going down.
The one thing about it is that there's only one team in the American League that has some documented success against Mariano Rivera, and that team is the Boston Red Sox. So it's not hopeless, but it's still Rivera. And he starts off by committing the cardinal reliever sin. He walks the leadoff man.
Mariano Rivera walked Kevin Millar. What's up with that? He's a hard guy to walk under any conditions.
And then the Red Sox do something that was very un-Red Sox-like. They insert a pinch runner, Dave Roberts. Everyone in the yard knows he's going to be trying to steal on Rivera. Rivera throws over to first a half dozen times. Roberts takes off on the first pitch.
He goes, the pitch taken outside. Here's the throw. Roberts dives, and he is safe. Stolen base, Dave Roberts.
Now, of course, that's only part B of the sequence, A being the walk, B being the stolen base. Got to get him home. And Bill Miller hit that single up the middle.
And watch Rivera, he just kind of belly flops down.
He swings and lines one up the middle into center field, a base hit. Roberts hits third. Here he comes. Bernie Williams' throw is cut off, and the game is tied.
There was no buzz on Yawkey Way before that game. There were a lot of people who had resigned themselves to they were probably going to witness a closing act. Instead, you get this great comeback against Rivera, and 3 innings later, here's Mr. Ortiz again, delivering once again a walk-off home run.
The 2-1. Swing and a drive, deep to right, way back, and this ball is gone!
No one's ever hit 2 walk-off home runs in the same postseason. And he had his routine down by this time where he flips off the helmet as he's rounding third so that they can't smash his head too much when he gets to home plate.
It was the longest game in playoff history. It was one of the most dramatic until later that day.
One of the great things about games 4 and 5 is that they ended on the same day, because game 4 ended at 1:22 in the morning on the same day that game 5 ended that night. It was a morning-night doubleheader, in effect, which you've never seen before. 2 playoff games, Red Sox, Yankees, walk-off hits by Ortiz to win them both.
That was an at-bat in which he combined the elements of, he was almost a Wade Boggs type of guy there. The threat of power is always there, but they don't need power there. All they need is a base hit. And on the 10th pitch, he was able to muscle a difficult pitch into center field for the game-winning hit. Extraordinary piece of hitting.
And a little flare, center field. The ball falls for a hit. Here comes Johnny Damon with the winning run, and David Ortiz has done it again. The Red Sox will play Game 6 tomorrow night in New York.
The return of Schilling in New York. A splash of blood on his white sock. A focus in his head. A fire in his heart. Who will ever forget the tension?
There was tremendous uncertainty going into Game 6, just what Curt Schilling would be able to deliver. There's a new designation that comes out of this World Series. MVP, Most Valuable Physician. Dr. Bill Morgan had come up with something that had never been tried before, something that he practiced on a cadaver before he did it with Curt Schilling.
Some Sox fans literally gave their lives in this case, but without knowing it, but they were used later on to help the Red Sox in the cause here.
We see this blood, all you can think of is the red badge of courage, that kind of stuff. Well, the important thing is, A, he's out there, and B, he's got his good stuff.
And shuts down the Yankees, and for the first time ever, calls are reversed in the favor of the Red Sox.
Mark Bellhorn hits the ball to left field, maybe 15 or 20 feet there, and it's clearly a home run. But no, it's not ruled a home run from first. The umpire on the left field line, whose only job is to adjudicate fair foul and whether the ball's a home run or not, does not know what's going on. They have to have a six-man umpire conclave, and at length they finally ruled that it is a home run. Alex Rodriguez, who is sinking, he's terrible. If you're a Red Sox fan, you pray that the wheels of fortune put him up in anything resembling a key situation. That's how low A-Rod has sunk as he hits this weak little dribbler up the first baseline.
First base side, Arroyo picks it up, and he tracked him, he dropped the ball! It rolls down the right field line!
And you see this ball rolling down the right field line, and I'm sure, you know, New England was recoiled in horror at that moment, thinking, oh, not again.
Just when you think that there's no new way for the Red Sox to lose an important game to the Yankees, here's a new way to lose an important game to the Yankees.
But once again, this year was different.
Now they're pointing to Jeter, he's out!
Well, the umpires got together and made the proper ruling.
He was declared out. Jeter returned to first, and that basically was the last gasp from the Yankees in this series.
Red Sox 4, Yankees 2. Game 7 and one team's clincher. The answer came surprisingly easily.
It was a very odd thing to happen because the game was a rout. It was a stress-less game for Red Sox fans, a stress-less game for the manager, and above all, an extraordinarily well-pitched game by the most improbable pitching hero of them all.
The drama was extracted from that game early. Ortiz hits the home run, Damon hits the grand slam.
Swinging a high drive to deep right, back toward the corner it goes, Sheffield looking up, grand slam! Johnny Damon, with one swing of the bat, has given the Red Sox 4 more runs. They lead it 6-0. 1-0 pitch. Swinging a ground ball to second base. Pokey Reese has it. He throws to first, and the Red Sox have won the American League pennant. The Boston Red Sox have pulled the greatest victory in team history.
Red Sox 10, Yankees 3. Done. Euphoria.
It's unprecedented. It's never happened before. I can't think of a more appropriate group of guys that have done something for the first time. I said earlier, I'm so proud to be part of this team. It's unbelievable.
Let's just get to this matter right now. As to the question as to whether it would have been sufficient for the Red Sox to have defeated the Yankees, but not to have gone on to defeat the Cardinals in the World Series, the answer is no. The answer is that beating the Yankees was a wonderful subplot. It made the whole ride sweeter. But the fact of the matter is the object of this entire thing was to win the World Series, and no one knew that more than the Boston Red Sox.
The Red Sox never had done anything like this. Beat the Yankees in the end when it really mattered. Not in 86 years anyway. Where were the words to describe the giddy and new? The World Series against the Cardinals was played out almost as a grand afterthought. The Cardinals never led in one inning in 4 games. Never. Whipped.
Hail the lovable idiots. Bless the baseball gods. Raise a cup to the good souls in Red Sox lore. From Ted Williams and Joe Cronin to Gary Waslewski and Pumpsy Green, who chased but never captured the game's greatest prize. The Red Sox are champions of the world. Bob Hohler, October 28, 2004.
And the World Series, was somewhat anticlimactic. The U. Epstein, I remember him talking the day before Game 1 saying, time to play Finland now. That whole analogy about, the U.S. Miracle Olympic team didn't win the gold when they beat the Russians. They had to play another game to win the gold. In the first game, the Red Sox made 4 errors.
And you've got a situation where a game that seemed to be well in hand for the Red Sox, now you're looking at a 9-9 tie, and we're wondering if we're going to be having another marathon night here.
It's not a very good moment, not a good feeling in the 8th inning. And Mark Bellhorn, with a man on base, hits the ball down the right field line. High, a good hit. He smacked that thing. And once again hits the pesky pole and wins the game.
Deep down the right field line toward the corner by the pesky pole. Walker looking up. Home run! It hit the foul pole!
That first game, I think, for La Russa, he's been around baseball a long time. He's now lost 8 straight World Series games. I think he knew there was trouble in Dodge when they didn't come out of that one with a win.
The final, 11-9. Red Sox win in a sloppy opener. On to Game 2 and the return of Curt Schilling.
I expected Curt to come out in a wheelchair for that game, the way everything was going at this point. And blood on the sock again.
Pitched on guile, pitched on guts, and the Cardinals had no answer.
Led all the way. The pitch. Swing and a ground ball to short. Cabrera has it. Stumbles, gets up, throws to first, and the Red Sox lead the series 2-9.
Up 2-0, and Pedro Martinez gets to start his first World Series game.
A lot of weight, a lot of pressure on him to go out and on the road and against a great lineup. And you keep thinking, the Cardinals are going to break out. How can they not break out?
Pedro was on the ropes in the first inning, if you recall, and the Cardinals committed the first of 2 monumental base-running gaffes.
If the Cardinals were still in the World Series, it ended when Jeff Suppan doesn't score on that confusing play.
Walker, hard ground ball, will tie the game to second. No, he stops now. Now the man is in a pickle. Here's the throw to third. He is out. Suppan ran.
He claimed afterward that he heard the Cardinals third base coach, Jose Oquendo, yelling, "No, no, no," when in fact Oquendo was yelling, "Go, go, go," which is the reverse of the famous moment in the '75 Red Sox World Series when Denny Doyle thought he heard Zim saying, "Go, go, go," and Zim was saying, "No, no, no."
Why don't they just come up with a color, you know? I mean, instead of this no, 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 go, go, go stuff. But you know what? It was an inexcusable gaffe by Jeff Suppan.
You could just feel the life come out of the ballpark, and you saw Tony La Russa drop his head in the Cardinal dugout when that happened.
The game should be tied.
Who would have believed that Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz would have assists in the same game?
Up 3-0. This time, no one would come back.
Johnny Damon hits the 4th pitch of the game over the fence. It's 1-0, and they could have stopped playing then. There were no more runs needed to be scored. No more were scored by the Cardinals.
Swinging a drive deep to right field. Way back it goes by the visiting bullpen and gone. Johnny Damon is led off the ball game with a home run.
And Lowe's got it going. The Cardinals are just dead. They're flat. And you could feel it building.
The pitch is swung on and missed. He struck him out. He has pitched shutout baseball through 7 innings.
If Keith Foulke is on the mound, the 2 outs, Edgar Renteria's up, and there's no feeling of panic or worry. You know it's going to happen.
Oftentimes, reporters have to go down to the clubhouse before the game is over just to get in there and all. And I told myself, not this time. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to see with my own eyes, see them winning this World Series.
1-0 pitch. Here it is. Swinging a ground ball, stabbed by Foulke. He has it. He underhands to first, and the Boston Red Sox are the world champions. For the first time in 86 years, the Red Sox have won baseball's world championship. Can you believe it?
Is that all there is? Why not us? Why not now? The party began. Something had happened that not many people living in Boston or New England had ever seen.
After all the waiting, all the conversation, all the speculation, this is the single greatest team achievement in the history of Major League Baseball.
Having grown up, in Boston and my dreaming of one day working for the Boston Globe and dreaming of one day covering the Red Sox, to be able to do that, to be able to be there at that special moment.
I had written a column late in the series about how this connects people, and really the magic of the Red Sox is the way they connect generations, families, fans. We talked for years about what would it be like if they ever won. You know what? It was great. It was happy. People were happy. And I checked. There was no spike in the obits, All those folks who said they just wanted to see the Red Sox win once before they died, they decided it was okay to keep on living.
That night, I thought of all the people back home watching the game and maybe feeling the same way that I did, and that was, mine eyes have seen the glory.
There were celebrations. There was a parade. There were names. From David Ortiz to Manny Ramirez to Mark Bellhorn to the redoubtable Schilling, typed into history for as long as there will be baseball and sport in the city. There were strangers kissing strangers, relatives remembered, children brought to see what exactly had happened. Who could have thought that this would ever happen? The Boston Red Sox, world champions. This was the greatest story of them all.